Telling the untold.
Fault lines. Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge. This morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 34,369,389 human beings across the United States and has killed 597,220 people. New York has stated that they will be ending COVID-19 restrictions once the state has reached the 70% vaccination rate. That makes sense. Vice President Kamala Harris is in Central America in an attempt to end the influx of migrants to the United States. Kamala Harris addressed Northern Triangle saying that, quote, "If you come to our border, you will be turned back." Let's play the clip.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
You will be turned back. Go away. Go away. Kamala Harris to migrants. Stay the F out. Hashtag Kamala. Sounding more and more like Trump every day, aren't we, Kamala? A bipartisan probe has led by two Senate committees has found that Capitol Police were previously aware of a pro-Trump website encouraging protesters to bring firearms and other weapons to display on January 6th. The government has recovered the majority of the $4.4 million ransom in the Colonial Pipeline hack. We have Donald Trump, and I pointed this out once before in trying to get across the level of severity and problem with Trump screaming to high heaven that Biden didn't win the presidency, and basically what it means. When you deconstruct that, you're basically saying that the government of the United States is not related to the government of the United States. And the weird part about it is you have all of these people who are in that exact same government of the United States that has lined themselves up behind Trump with this particular line of logic. That Biden not only didn't win, but didn't win in a landslide. And by the way, even if the people aren't coming out and saying, okay, yeah, we're following Trump's line specifically, the fact that they're giving fealty and allegiance gets across where the power is. I don't think this is a shadow on the wall. I think Trump actually does have this level of influence. Let's play the clip, Andre. Let's hear Trump.
That election will go down as the crime of the century, and our country is being destroyed by people who perhaps have no right to destroy it.
People who perhaps have no right to destroy it. Considering that no one particular individual owns America, then yes, you would be right that one person does not have the right to despoil America. By the same token, I hope you hear it from his own mouth. This isn't me putting words in his mouth. This isn't me making it up. This isn't me with hype. None of that stuff. I tend to be an honest actor when I give my arguments. And in this very specific case, Donald Trump has a very explicit line and message that the government is illegitimate. That's profound on some level. Let's keep going. The Israeli parliament will be holding a vote of confidence on a new form of government on June 14th. If confirmed, Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu, will be ousted from power after 12 years as prime minister. And despite reading that headline, something in me recoils at that because I cannot believe that Bibi could be ripped out of power like that, especially using basically air votes, something that's unheard of, unless something has changed. But it's Bibi potentially dragged out of power. What a day. Now, the person who's taking control of the parliament at this point is going to be just as bad, if not worse, than Bibi. There is no left wing in the way that we would think of a left wing in America on this notion of Israel, Palestine, and foreign and the policy of such. The new guy, Benali, I believe his name is, he's going to come in and he's basically going to be Bibi, just younger. Yeah, whatever you think of this is not a win for Palestinians in the strictest sense of the word. Yes, it's nice seeing Bibi leave. By the same token, let's just be very clear that the policies is not necessarily changing with the people in leadership. In tech news, the WWDC 21 occurred yesterday, put on by Apple. They announced new features like My AirPods tracking and the ability to add driver's license to Apple virtual wallets. That's convenient. Jeff Bezos has stated that he will board Blue Origin New Shepard space shuttle on the 20th, July 20th, on his first human flight. And Jeff Bezos, billionaire, richest man alive and that have ever walked the earth, will be blasted into space. Jeff Bezos. What does it look like if Jeff Bezos blasts himself into space and gets to Mars first? And he sets up a little colony on Mars. And he has enough money to set up a little oxygen tank that makes oxygen and that uses the chemicals and everything else there to produce the chemicals and the products that he needs. He's already made the proof of concept. And he calls Mars Bezos World from here on out. And there's a conflict on whether Mars can be called Bezos World and whether one man, one billionaire, who just had the ungodly amount of resources to be able to build some kind of ship and some kind of habitation device to basically steal Mars. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. There's one more headline that I want to give that I am aggravated by, so I am going to give the headline. Democratic report raises 2022 alarms in messaging and voter outreach. Now, whatever you want to think about Donald Trump was able to grab an additional number of African Americans, increases margins with Hispanics, African Americans. He was able to do that despite the fact that he was called everything but a child of God, racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobic, etc., etc., etc. All of those things were attributed to Trump and yet increased margins. How? Why did the Democrats lose seats in the House as opposed to winning them? Why is it only 51 votes in the Senate? How do you have a president that loses 500,000 Americans, more than all of the other wars, and yet it's still, I can't call it a squeaker, but it definitely should have been far more significant than what it was? Well, the report is basically an autopsy. An autopsy is very strange and weird in and of itself because an autopsy typically entails that the patient has died. And usually these autopsies are performed on dead bodies. It is a very weird phenomena to see an autopsy done on a patient that is squeaking and walking around the room. And yet, here we are. Nonetheless, the Democratic Party said we need to do an autopsy. Now, by my hypothesis of this, and I think my hypothesis is right, whether or not they can respond to environmental phenomena that they are witnessing. I mean, think back for the moment. You had Bernie Sanders, socialist, basically running against Hillary Clinton and giving her a run from her money, basically taking half of the party, a little bit, more or less. And that's even with the dodgy actions that the Democratic Party were doing, basically cheating the guy. A socialist in America, basically trying to take the Democratic Party and almost does it. Then you have Trump beating the stuffing out of Hillary Clinton, despite calling him every name but a child of God and freaking out the public. You had protests going for the entirety of the year last year. You even had a police station set on fire. You had a putsch attempt against the government of the United States. You had 2 impeachments within the context of 1 presidency. You had a raid on the Capitol where cops were fist fighting Trump supporters. You had Sanders, weakened, depowered, tired. He is an octogenarian or close to it, octogenarian. Can't say that word for some reason. But you get my point. He's been running for basically 4 years. The body gives way at some point, regardless of how stern the will. Regardless of how stern his will, regardless of how sturdy the body in that very specific situation, when they hit South Carolina, they believed that Sanders was going to run away with it. Chris Matthews got fired. He used the reference. And I understood the reference that he was trying to make, even though it was used in this kind of ham-fisted way. But basically, when France is overrun by the Nazis, and the Nazis didn't have this kind of war protocol, well, it was very specific. These guys had the capabilities of basically taking action independently of the larger staff. And so they took one advantage after the next. And before you knew it, France was conquered. Calls Britain and said, it's over. It's over. It's done. What? What do you mean it's done? It's over. We're finished. We surrendered. That's the point that he was trying to make, that the Democratic Party was basically swallowed whole by the Bernie faction and the energy that was associated with that faction. But what does it look like to the Democratic Party? Think about how Chris Matthews was acting. Hey, maybe we should give this one over to Trump, because if Sanders takes it, he's going to take it for a generation. Why? Why? Why is he going to take it for a generation? Because the public is going to be so magnificently happy and ecstatic by having somebody to represent their interests that they're going to, do the sane and rational thing that people do when people are representing their interests, and they're going to go and they pull the lever for that person. That's what they're going to do. The Democratic Party sees that as existential. You had a billionaire coming out of the shadows. Instead of putting money into the candidates' pockets and pushing them to do those things, he says, screw it, I'm going to get in the ring myself. And you had Bloomberg with an ego that is astonishingly unbecoming of the individual that is holding that ego, gets hit in the face over and over again, spills $1 billion to utterly and entirely get embarrassed. You had a candidacy of eat the rich. That basically what the session was for the Democratic Party. And yet a billionaire believes that he's going to get in the ring and run with it. Nonsense. The entirety of the party ends up collapsing in order to stop Sanders. A weakened, depowered, tired Sanders. It's a wake-up call. But despite the fact that it's a wake-up call, their capability of responding to it is lacking and non-existent. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party both see it. They both notice it. No, they don't know what it is. And no, they're lacking greatly the capability of responding. The thing is, when you have 15, 20, 30, 40 years of getting your way, where the other side basically allows it, where there's a class war and one side doesn't even realize that there's a fight, then you can have this situation where you think to yourself, I don't want to give up my gains. I don't want to give up my gains. I don't want to change this system in a systemic way that would stop people from raiding the Capitol. I don't want to put through policies that the American public is going to love so much that they're going to continuously put us in office in order to maintain those policies. We don't want to do that because that runs against our business interests. That runs against the people who are putting money in our G-string and running credit cards through our butt cheeks. We are the Democratic Party. They don't want to do that. They could do that. They don't want to do that. And therein lies the rub. The thing that you need, you're trying to be FDR without being FDR. And I just made the point last week that experiment has failed. That ship has sailed. That doesn't exist. There is no such thing as being, I want danger without the danger. I want the coffee without the coffee. I want the ice without the cold. It doesn't work that way. If you want to be FDR, FDR is not just a word. It's not just an icon. There were certain policies and there was an urgency associated with the individual that's associated with that name. And so when the party has this autopsy, multiple groups, third-way Democrats and I think it was a Hispanic group, and they come back and they say, and I'll just read it right here. In a review of the 2020 election conducted by several prominent Democratic advocacy groups, has concluded that the party is at risk of losing ground with blacks, Hispanics, and Asian American voters unless it does a better job representing its economic agenda and countering Republican efforts to spread misinformation. The catch is that the Democratic brand was so weakened and so lacking that the public didn't know what it was. And so its capability of being defined by the opposition was just an open lane. So when Republicans attacked and castigated, those attacks on some level worked. You didn't have a Democratic Party with a brand. You didn't have a Democratic Party where people understood what it meant. You didn't have a Democratic Party where there were policies associated with it, not just theatrics, not just, I'm black, vote for me. I'm a hermaphrodite, Hispanic, gay person, put me in office. But what are you going to do in that office? What do you mean what I'm going to do? Look at all my attributes. I have like 4 different identities. How can you not put me in that office? It's not about your identity. It's about what you do in that office. Period. Represent their interests, you get their vote. Period. That is what this document is basically saying. And so what did the Democratic Party do after reading a report like this? They turn around and they say, all right, we see the problem. The problem is that progressives kept complaining about cops shooting people in the face, that they kept complaining about cops running over people and defund the police, and they spooked the public. No, that's not what it is. What it is that you don't have a strong economic model. You don't have vision. That's what's lacking. This capability of saying, America, here's our new contract. Put us in that office. Give us the people that we need, and we will pass this agenda, this specific agenda that you, America, that you want. We will do that. We're fighting for you. And every time you open your mouth, every time a mic is put in your face, you're screaming, America. And you have policies that go with it, that you're willing to burn it down to back the American public. That's what America wants. Bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship is utterly and entirely ridiculous. That's not the point. The point is to have a political will, to have such political force and gravity and popular support, especially within the context of a republic, that the other party, that the opposition has no choice but to bend or to be destroyed. Most are rational enough to read the writing on the wall and bend and come to your position. That's bipartisanship. The nonsense that is taking place in the Senate and the House is not. And therein lies the rub. This report is very clear that your issue here is you. And right now, the negotiations that have been taking place in Congress have gotten across this very clear. Biden said $15 is a starvation wage. Now, heroes, the people who were there, who had to work at those jobs, despite the fact that COVID was there, they had to work at those warehouses, they had to deliver those packages, they had to serve that food, they put their lives and their bodies at risk for us. Those people, those heroes, were not making $15 an hour. 42% of the American public made less, or $18,000 a year or less. That is nothing. And yet, when the opportunity was present, the canary in the coal mine, to get $15 an hour over the finish line, 40 million people would have been affected by that. Think of the families, think of the downstream effects in regards to cutting down crime, cutting down mental issues, stress, depression, all of these downstream effects that would have been assisted in this process. And if it would have kept up with, inflation, wages, and all that other productivity, that number would have been at 20-something. 15 is a compromise. You get it in the House. The president says he's for it. Manchin says, screw it. I don't believe that the American worker is worth $15 an hour. And if I need to stop and kill the COVID bill to make that point that much more clear and kick food out of the mouths of infants, I will do that. And Joe Manchin did that. And they immediately took it out and they proceeded and they applauded as they betrayed the American worker. 2022 in the midterms, they're at risk. Their position is in prize. And it's a very specific situation where they're going to ignore the report, they're going to blame progressives, and they're going to keep on ticking that despite 600,000 Americans have gone up in flames, that this is a slow walk to business, as usual. When they lose the House or they lose the Senate, this presidency will be effectively over. I said it months ago. You can see it writing on the wall. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines. Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. The UFO report is supposed to be coming out this month, and in fact, it's supposed to be out by now, but it's being pushed. We don't necessarily know if the report is going to be punted or not, but we are waited with bated breath. The New York Times came out with a leak, basically giving this kind of heads up on what they believe is going to be in a report and what they were told that was going to be in a report. That basically, we can't conclude that it's aliens. By the same token, we can't explain what we're saying, so we can't conclude that it's not. Now, I would make the argument that that report is logical confirmation. Now, I put logical confirmation in quotes. And what I mean by that is, from the standpoint of the government, in this kind of overt way, the government is giving you information that it's never given you before. Whether it's true or not is secondary to the point that it's giving you the information in regards to what it wants you to believe and what it wants the narrative to be. It's not us. It is not the United States aircraft. It is not our special aircraft. It is not our secret aircraft. It is not us. Now, you're stuck with something, right? Did China and Russia leapfrog us? Now, the report is not indicating that. The report is leaving you with a perspective of the world. The report is not killing this issue. It's not dinging the videos. It's not explaining that stuff. It even puts a classified aspect in it, meaning that the report is going to be magnificently unsatisfying. And Congress is going to need more data, which means it pushes the issue forward. Now, I have covered this issue for years. I've covered this issue before all of this stuff came out. In fact, one of the people, the guests that we had on the show, had briefed like a year or two in advance before all of this stuff started coming out. There's a certain level of choreography that seems to be taking place here. It is very strange push and pull that I don't necessarily understand all of the elements that are taking place in it. It is radically in the black. What I do know, it does seem different. This doesn't feel like something that has happened prior in the way that it is happening. The Pentagon is not killing the story. The videos are being leaked to the public, and you do seem to have elements that seem to want to get the information out for whatever particular reason they want to get the information out. For example, Lou Elizondo still has a security clearance. Love the guy. Very affable and everything else. But why? Where does he work? Who does he work for? In what capacity does he work? Meaning, if you don't know that answer, how do you come to a conclusion about why he is doing what he is doing if it could have some influence on the job that he is doing? This is kind of what I mean when I said this stuff is in the black. We're being given information, and the information that we're given, we almost have to take it as is, or basically reject. It's hard to independently verify. A video came out a few days ago that shook me to my core on this subject. I've already told you that I already believe that it's us and not us. The technical capacity of getting here is only compared to us. So we don't know. It's a question mark regarding other societies or civilizations or whatever else. The catch here, though, is what is the government doing and who is doing it and why? Now, Sam Harris is a philosopher. He's an author. Anybody who watches this channel will know who Sam Harris is. He's been in all sorts of debates, including famous debates with Noam Chomsky, if I remember correctly. And he has been around for God knows how long. I've never heard Sam Harris talk about UFOs. And what chilled me in this wasn't that he was talking about UFOs. It's what he said around the subject. Going further than having a topic about it, going into this notion that he was contacted and by Intel to assist in basically, I guess, being in a Zoom call with, I would imagine, this notion of assisting in disseminating the information in a way that doesn't scare the public. Now, this is shocking to me. And the reason it's shocking to me is because this is not his shtick. This is not what he does. Either he is lying outright or he is on some magnificent drugs. I don't know which one it is, but I suspect he's not lying. If you think back to Operation Mockingbird was the goal of the intelligence to try to see if it could influence the American population's perspective and point of view. And one of the ways of doing this was basically dealing with influencers, people who had large amounts of influence in the society itself, and getting with them and basically giving data, giving info, getting relationships. Is this just the modern day version of that? For an issue of magnificent significance? I think it chilled me because it became a bit more real in the way that it's being articulated. And I've already said before, I have concerns about what the transition looks like. Let's play the clip, though, so you guys know what I'm talking about.
We may be faced with another problem on this front that will be interesting for people like ourselves to navigate. So the other shoe hasn't quite dropped here, but there was recently an article in the Washington Post. This may have been covered many other places, but I saw it there, that the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Pentagon are scheduled to brief Congress about the wealth of data that the government has on UFOs.
All right.
Right. And stuff leaked or was leaked purposely during this last year and got surprisingly little attention. But the rumors that I've heard, and again, this is still just in the mode of rumors, but perhaps soon to be confirmed, is that our intelligence services and the Pentagon are going to tell Congress that this is real, right? This is a real phenomenon, right? It's not that UFOs have been explained to the satisfaction of the government. On the contrary,
they'd have to change their name.
They have seen that there's technology that really can't be of human origin, right? That they don't think this is the Chinese or the North Koreans or some other part of human society producing technology that is strange, and they can't write it off as anomalies of perception. I mean, there's just too much radar data, there's too much satellite imagery at this point, and the stuff they're sitting on that's top secret is much better than anything that's been leaked out, right? So this is still something that's just...
I'm cynical when someone says this cannot be of human origin. That sounds to me like a 50s movie.
Exactly. Many of the details.
Let's stop right there. Sam Harris basically said, cannot be of human origin. And if you notice something else when he's talking about like the intel hits and everything else, he's making the point about rumors. Rumors from who? Who are you in contact with? When you were talking about the article for the Washington Post, you were very specific. There was an article in the Washington Post that I covered. When you were talking about something else, you were very specific. So in the context of rumors, who are the rumors from? If they were from your buddies, why would you find your buddy just talking off the top of his head being something as astute enough or informed enough of an opinion to consider it rumors where you would talk about it publicly? That's very strange. The catch here is that I think the key to this conversation has to do with the former intel and the other people reaching out to him, basically talking about this stuff, meaning he is hearing something from behind the scenes. And he is coming out, having a conversation about it. And look, I don't even know if Harris is supposed to be saying this. Because if you notice, when he's having this conversation, he says, well, there are rumors and there are people who want to make sure and manage this so nobody gets freaked out when it comes out because there are difficult conversations that need to be had. And they're trying to get it out. Who is he talking to? Well, he said he was talking to Intel. Okay, why? Well, he said there was a Zoom call that he was going to be on with the idea of how we're going to explain this to the public. And on some level of explaining it to the public, you're also stuck in a situation of apologizing to a lot of people who you basically castigated and called conspiracy theorists. You're going to have a lot of explaining to do, not to mention the lying and everything else. So Harris, why is Harris doing this? And why was Harris contacted? And were there more people than Harris? Meaning, is Harris just one of a lot of other people who just didn't say anything about the fact that they were contacted when they're bringing up this specific issue. That is a very weird quirk. I am very curious about whether he is an odd man out in this or whether there are multiple people like the Tom DeLonge. If you remember, Tom DeLonge said, because if you notice, it's like, why would they give this to a rock star? Think about it. Why would they give it to a rock? Like, it's the weirdest thing in the world to say we're going to get Blink 182 singer to be the carrier of this information. Well, DeLonge said, well, I was going to give these guys an outlet for books and radio and media. He's already well known, et cetera, et cetera. It was the popularity and everything else associated with it that seemed to be the thing that was Tom DeLonge's key attribute. He was an influencer. And is it possible that Sam Harris is another? And it is also possible that there are others who just hadn't pulled the Sam Harris saying rumors. Back in the Second World War in Germany, Germany made it illegal to use radios, especially foreign broadcasts. You can use German radio, but that's because they were indoctrinating you with all sorts of propaganda that they wanted you to get. You couldn't listen to the BBC, any of that stuff. And if you did, you were going to get put in prison. I think Goebbels wanted 10 years. And so what people would do is they would say, I had a dream that your son was alive and safe in a British prison camp. You had a dream about that, huh? Yes, I had a dream about that. Because the moment that you said, Sam Harris, look, somebody needs to get him and ask him a ton of questions. Because that is an astonishing statement. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Initially, during the Trump administration, the idea of the Wuhan lab leak hypothesis was an outright conspiracy theory. It was derided. You couldn't even say it on Facebook. Otherwise, you might get kicked off or put in Facebook jail. Donald Trump will be in it for 2 years. However, now, brand new day, brand new day. And not only is it just a hypothesis, it's one of the prevailing hypotheses that is now being batted around. How weird is that? Despite the fact that nothing from the standpoint of new data has been introduced. Joining us to have a conversation about this is Shoban Saxena. He's a Sao Paulo-based journalist reporting on trade, culture, music, and, of course, football. Despite an interest in international issues, human rights, and politics, Saxena's position allows him to capture a slice of the colorful and often overlooked lives of regular people in the countries that he is showing interest. Shoban, thank you for joining us, man. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Jamal. Good morning, Shane. It's good to be on the show again.
Absolutely. You sent me a story, and you said, I would love to talk about this story because I don't think this story is basically consistent or that it can be ripped apart with alternative solutions. Now, the story is out of Newsweek, and it is called, let's see, what is the exact name of this? So the story is called Exclusive, How Amateur Sleuths Broke the Wuhan Lab Story and Embarrassed the Media. How these amateur sleuths. Now, basically, just to set the premise, you have a bunch of people who are on Twitter. And what initially started off as basically accepting the main line, they eventually got curious and suspicious. And they started to do detective work online to try to figure out whether or not there was evidence for the idea of it being somewhat of a lab leak. And apparently, they were doing all sorts of detective work and everything else. And they were getting one clue here, one clue there. But they basically started looking at a mine and seeing how these miners were getting sick by something that looked similar. And this, basically, they worked their way to putting this out. Now, the first time I heard this was from the atomic scientist, the nuclear clock guys. I don't know who these guys are. And so if Newsweek are saying this is where that came from, okay, fair enough. But the first story I saw with the atomic scientists before it caught wildfire, people started talking about it, it was like the atomic scientists gave it legitimacy in a way that other people didn't. What is wrong with the way Newsweek is recounting this very, very long story? And basically, I'm not saying pinning it on China, but basically pinning it on China, or at the very least saying there's a heaping level of suspicion that it does belong to China's lab. What are your thoughts about the story first? And why was it of interest where you were like, I want to talk about the story?
Thank you, Jamal. You know, the fundamental principle of journalism is amount of healthy skepticism about anything you say, about any claim. And here you have a bunch of people, nobody knows who they are, and some of them are anonymous, and they're making huge claims that this virus, COVID-19, came from a lab in China, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But this story is just plain propaganda. It just puts out in the print what these people have been claiming. No questions asked, no red flags raised. And it's very interesting to find one of the guys who's involved in this is called the Seeker.
Right.
He's just a Twitter account. We don't know if he's a person. It seems he's a man who's in touch with some two other an Indian couple who are based in the city of Pune. They interact with him. He's a very interesting character. He loves music, and his only interest is truth. Come on, I mean, someone who's making such a serious claim, you find more about them. This is such a serious claim that this saying that this virus came out of lab. You need proof. And it's very interesting. There's all these people, this group of people who are sitting in different countries. I don't know if they're real or they're fake or they're just Twitter accounts, how they came together, who's funding them, who's behind them. No questions have been asked. So, of course, as a journalist, I became very skeptical about this story because it's a hit piece. They have taken certain information, and that information has been weaponized. Because if you make a claim, a serious claim, the first thing you do, you have to show your face to the people, right, who you are, what is your background, why I'm making this claim, how you found it. And it's very interesting. They found everything on Google. The WHO team went to China. They went to the lab. They went to the Wuhan wet market. They could not find any evidence. Or what they found, they put it in a report. But these people sitting where they are found everything in Google.
Well,
amazing.
That's the wild part, right? Yeah, because they're like these amateur sleuths. And it's like, okay, well, did they go there? No. What did they do? Google. And it's like, okay, so a bunch of anonymous accounts came out and basically pointed the finger at China. And they used something, it's talking about miners, they're talking about the molecule or whatever else that's associated with it, to try to do it. But nobody knows who these guys are. Like, it's very weird. Like, when you have reports, there's stories talking about intelligence officers that are basically like blending in normal daylight. Like, sometimes they have these fake identities, they have these fake personas. They're there to do various jobs. Sometimes they might be hits. Sometimes they might be intelligence or influence. There might be all sorts of things, right? This is stuff that's reported in mainstream media. So it's not like, oh, it's a secret. I didn't know that. Meaning the moment that you have a world like that, how do you ignore that information? How do you take that information off the table when you're having these conversations, right? And so it's like you have deep competition in the way that Joe Biden talks about it. And you've accused China of genocide. You've accused all this stuff, like everything but a child of God. And now they're like, all right, let's take a relook at this Wuhan lab leak story. Let's take a relook. And let's use anonymous people in areas that we don't know to do it. Very weird and very strange. And the media just jumped on it.
Yeah, I would call them, they are the white helmets of the Wuhan story. What the white helmets are doing in Syria. There's some very well-meaning guys. They're helping people. They go around with this nice uniform with white helmets, and they're trying to help this, helpless Syrian people. But we know that the white helmets had links with the British intelligence, who was funding them. So the whole idea of these white helmets was to create a narrative against the Assad government, that this government was gassing people with chemical weapons. And we know that all these stories were actually false. So, Jamal, everything in the world, in politics and life and journalism, the most important thing is timing. And this story has just come out at the right time.
Perfect
we had
timing.
A story in Wall Street Journal or Washington Post claiming that according to anonymous intelligence sources, the three scientists from Wuhan lab had fallen sick in 2019 or 2020, and that Joe Biden then asked intelligence agencies to find evidence. Look at it. He's asking the intelligence agency to find the evidence within 90 days.
Isn't that
And then you
wild?
have the story coming out.
I mean, and they're like,
And the story comes.
they have zero skepticism of this. That's the wild part. Like, I'm always enamored by media because it's like, you would think that there should be more common sense associated with it. And it doesn't seem to be. And I can't tell. I was like, are they lying or are they incompetent? And I'm beginning to lean on the side of incompetent with a certain degree of ideology where they just don't, the question doesn't occur to them. Like, so in their heads, okay, well, the president is saying, do a recheck. Okay. And the president found additional information after several years. And we're just going to run with that. And it's like, but wait a minute. You guys have had intelligence sources that were giving you information that was of low quality that you ran with as if it was perfect intelligence. And you are doing that again. Like, it's the side rate, what is it? Sideshow Bob. Where Sideshow Bob keeps stepping on the same rake over and over and over again, just doing a disservice to the country. And by the way, same network, Newsweek, exclusive, inside the military secret undercover army. And it goes into talking about like all of these people were basically on the payroll in these capacities. Sometimes they're just identities online. Sometimes they're, in a presence that are just working on behalf of government for some kind of secret ends. Now, the same network has this story without a hint of skepticism.
Exactly. I mean, this is, for me, is just like another Russia Gate. When Russia Gate was happening, there's MSNBC and CNN and New York Times every day talking about how Russia interfered in the US election. And they always refer to 18 intelligence agencies. According to 18 intelligence agencies, there were no 18 intelligence agencies. There were only 3. And New York Times even retracted the story. They ran a correction saying this is an assessment of 3 intelligence agencies, not 18. 18 would also include the Coast Guard. I don't think the U.S. Coast Guard deal with the investigation into election. And now this is very interesting. Now there are 17 labs actually. And the
17 labs.
And it's called the labs with capital L. It's a collection of 17 elite scientific research facilities in the U.S. who will help the intelligence agencies to find the origins of COVID-19 as per the instructions of President Joe Biden. This is so funny, I can't tell you.
And you know what's wild about this? It's coinciding with the Putin-Biden summit. That too.
Yes.
And so it's like, all right, so what is the take here? What's the goal? What's the objective of the summit? Because Biden is the one that called for the summit. And are these things related? I think they are. Meaning this notion, these guys are committing genocide. And so, all right, let's have some deep competition. So we're going to go with that. We're going to use nasty, disgusting words like that, despite the fact that you're like one of our major trading partners. So if it's like working with the Nazis, like this, it's mind-blowing when you think about it. You also have this other thing where it's like, all right, we've demonized Russia for 3 years. That's enough. Let's bring them back into from the cold. And let's try to use Russia to mitigate China. So we're going to basically use Putin as a club to hit China, despite the fact that Russia and China have gotten to such a degree in their relationship that they're putting a base on the moon or on Mars or something. Like, it seems like these things are coincided with one another of, okay, let's try to make peace with Russia and let's go hard on China. And hence you have, here we are, special delivery, amateur sleuths finding evidence. Look, I am not of mind. If it came from China lab, I'm okay with that. If it didn't come from the lab, I'm okay with that too. What I don't want it to be used as a political club in order to hit an international opponent. That's what I don't want. I don't want this stuff leading into these kind of hard edges. From your standpoint, when you're looking at this stuff, how do you view this? I mean, I know the story has to be breaking around the world. How is it breaking where you are? You're in Brazil, right? Just some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Sao Paulo.
Jamal, yeah. Jamal, very interesting. I've been tracking this story from the beginning when the pandemic started. I've been covering it for various Indian publications and other publications, the pandemic in Brazil, and following it very, very closely. Very interesting. When the pandemic started, it was blamed on China immediately. And there's all these typical, stereotypical racist things like the Chinese eat bats, and because of they eat bats, they eat everything. they got the virus, and virus has gone global. This is a story.
Yeah.
But very interesting, I noted, when this virus was restricted to China, what was the narrative in the Western media? The narrative was, and this is a story in Guardian, the New York Times, this is going to be China's Chernobyl moment. They thought this virus will destroy China. I remember distinctly there was a story in New York Times saying, oh, there's going to be a mass uprising against Xi Jinping in China. And 1 year down, what has happened? China is looking like the most secure country in the world. Yeah. They've checked the virus. The economy is growing. The society is stable. And whose Chernobyl moment it is? The West. Look at the US. Maximum number of cases, maximum number of deaths, maximum number of hospitalizations. Which two other countries are the worst? India and Brazil. And very interestingly, Jamal, this story is going viral only in 3 countries, the US, India, and Brazil. Because these 3 countries have the worst response to the virus. The people are suffering the most. They have failed to control the virus. They have failed to control deaths. Their economies are tanking, and they have no counter argument. So what do they sell to the people? Well, they tell to the people, the government of these countries, oh, it's not our fault. It came from China. It came from a lab. You know, the Chinese are, they're this kind of people where they release this intentionally. So all this is all part of that game. This is all part of this weaponizing the information. You take a bit of real information, mix it with a lot of conjecture and fake information, and weaponize it in a certain way, and you then plant it into Newsweek, and Vanity Fair also ran an article. And I can tell you, almost all Indian publications, except for the good publications like The Wire, which is an alternative publication, which I write for, all Indian publications have just picked this story and they're running with it as some kind of truth. So this is what is happening. A narrative is being built that it was not our fault because the government of these countries have no solution to offer to the people, no narrative to offer, so they just blame it on China.
I want to go back to this. Growing. Let's take a break because I want to come back to this conversation. This is really interesting to me. India and China right beside one another in regards to countries. And I want to get into whether or not there are larger political consequences for that line of thinking. Meaning, we're going to blame China. Okay, if you're going to blame China, what are you going to do about it? That type of logic. You know what I mean? You get trapped into that particular thing where we're framing this for our society as this. Your society then is going to expect you to respond in some particular way, in a way that's commiserate with what they consider to be malfeasance on behalf of China. So let's talk about that when we come back. The voice that you guys were listening to is Shobhan Saxena. He is a Sao Paulo-based journalist reporting on trade, culture, music, and of course, football. His previous position was an editor at Sunday Times of India. His current position in journalism is Brazil. He seeks to capture a slice of the colorful and often overlooked lives of regular people in the countries of interest. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We continue to be joined with Shobhan Saxena. He's a Sao Paulo-based journalist reporting on trade, culture, music, and, of course, football. Shobhan worked previously as editor of the Sunday Times of India and is currently working in Brazil. Shobhan, again, thank you for continuing to join me.
Thank you, Jamal. It's great to be on your show.
Absolutely. So we were getting into a conversation about India and China and the relations, meaning the countries that were worse hit were the countries that were basically focusing on this notion of blaming else or somebody else. Basically, basically India, the United States, and Brazil. And in this case, the story about the Wuhan lab leak, something that was considered to be farcical and conspiracy theory that is now taken with all sorts of grains of truth. Well, that story is now taken off, especially in the United States. And I like your point on this. It's like, it's not just the U.S., it's all those three countries are the countries that are focusing on this story that much more so, because those countries are trying to find somebody else to blame. Now, do the people of those countries blame China? Like in the United States, before the virus hit, polling showed this like a precipitous drop in the perspectives of people towards the Chinese. It was astonishing to watch. And if you think about it, it makes sense. You have like decades of saying the Chinese are stealing your jobs. The Chinese are taking your jobs. You have people coming into the country and they're thinking that the immigration is somehow adversely affecting them. And in the case of the virus basically fit within the context of that, especially within the context of an American government that has started to look at China as a certain degree of competition. Keep in mind, when Obama was doing his Asian pivot and he was trying to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership done, he was trying to get that done as a plan, as a playbook in order to hobble or at the very least compete with China. He was trying to sew up trade in a way that China wouldn't be able to do it. It failed. He wasn't able to do it. And honestly, considering what he was going to give up, meaning the sovereignty of this country in order to get it across, I'm glad he did not do it. But I guess I'm making the very basic point that in this case, we had this notion of a concerted, clear-cut competition against China that the media space responded to. And so you can understand how this precipitous drop would take place. And with COVID and Trump screaming the China virus, talking about they were putting Chinese people on planes with the virus, like this nonsense. Well, that number just went radically higher. So how is India regarding it, and how is Brazil regarding it? And in the context of regarding it, meaning the regular people themselves, the people who are on the ground. And secondary, how is the political space responding to those people regarding the story in that way?
As far as the common people are concerned, whether they're in India or Brazil or a common American, they want solutions. They want treatment. They want the hospitals to work. They want the government to provide them, vaccines and take care of them or provide them economic assistance. People want answers from their government. An ordinary Indian is not going to ask the Chinese government for an answer. So that's why, and the governments, they don't have any answers. So they're spinning this tale of this virus. You know, when you say the virus came from the lab, you are insinuating that virus was released intentionally. It is very clear to me. Jamarl, very interesting. Biden is going to Europe this week. I think is going tomorrow
real
or
quick,
today.
why do you believe that they think that that's intentional? I mean, when I hear the virus was released from the lab, I didn't think of it intentional. I just thought it was a mistake.
Because the way you construct the story, the virus came from the lab, you know, and what has happened? The virus came from the lab, but it didn't do any damage to China. You put it together. The virus came from the lab, but no damage done to China. So they must have released it intentionally. So that is the story being spun again and again. And who were the first people who got sick? There were three Chinese scientists working at that lab. So they must have done something. They must have done something really criminal. You know, the whole thing is being conducted like a murder investigation and not like a proper scientific investigation. Jamarl, I'll just make a very important point. The most important thing about this virus, and which is also most dangerous, that large number of people who are infected, they remain asymptomatic or have very mild and moderate infection. Only a very small percentage of people go to hospitals and die. So how are you going to find the patient zero? You can never find it. Because what if the first 5 people or 20 people or 100 people who got infected had no symptoms or had mild symptoms, or they thought it was just common flu?
Right.
So when you're conducting this murder-like investigation, let's find patient zero, let's find that animal, let's find the exact scientists who got infected and who released the virus to the world. It's never going to happen, and they know it. They're never going to find it. But the whole idea, they're not interested in truth, these people. They're interested in building a narrative.
It's the beat your wife
blame
story.
it on China.
Yes, to beat your wife
Yeah.
story. It's like how long have you been beating your wife? What are you talking about? I don't beat my wife. Yeah. I hear you. But there were stories about you beating your wife. Well, if anybody's watching that, you've spent 10 minutes having a conversation about beating your wife. Like it's that. So it's like if I invoke genocide, this other stuff, it's a characterization or a character destruction. But what are the foreign policy implications of this between India and China? You guys weren't the countries weren't necessarily always on the best of terms.
Yeah, because when the pandemic started, I think the Indian government started dreaming that the China will suffer a lot of damage, like the US was dreaming, and India will benefit from it. India will benefit from it how? India will benefit in the sense that a lot of companies will move out of China, the supply chains will move out of China, the manufacturing capacity, manufacturing units will move out of China and move to India. That's what they were dreaming with. It's not going to happen. It's not happening. And that's why the frustration has set in. If we look at India today, in the past 1 month, they were recording 400,000 cases a day, almost 4,000 deaths a day. Infection is still very high. Vaccination is faltering. We had dead bodies floating in the river Ganges, which is considered one of the holiest rivers in India. Hundreds of dead bodies floating. People running out of wood for cremation. People running out of space in cemeteries. This is a situation in India. Do you think any country is going to invest money, or they're going to shift their manufacturing unit from China to India in the middle of pandemic? So there was a lot of talk about in India as well in US about the global supply chains. Right. There should be they're talking about there should be a change in it. What do you mean by it? What do you mean by it? Take China out of the global supply chain, because the US has realized they cannot beat China. Whole purpose of U.S. foreign policy is now to contain China by hook or by crook. And very unfortunately, India is acting like a henchman of the U.S. foreign policy by attacking China, by making this kind of baseless allegations. Of course, it has not come from the government of India as yet. It's only coming from these ordinary people, the common sleuths who are working. They're the vigilantes. They're working in public good.
I think
nobody
the concern
knows who these people are.
Well, I think the concern is that the government does respond. Because if you think about it, the government does have an incentive in responding to this, or with some level of bellicosity. Especially we're talking about the supply chain stuff. We're talking about trying to move manufacturing. All of those things are in the interest of the Modi government, any government for that matter, even the U.S. government for that matter. And so it's like, if this would have been the thing to do it, then yeah, you can see how an incentive would be put there for them to want that to take place. Where do you think this goes? Does this go anywhere? Does this basically, fizzle out into nothingness? Is this just a narrative that is keep being provoked without any kind of consequence associated with the asserting of the narrative? What are your thoughts on how this perpetuates itself in the U.S., but also in the two other countries?
I think what impact will it have is too early to say, but they're trying to build this narrative. Actually, the whole idea is to the world to lose faith in China. That's the idea, that China is not a trustworthy country, it's not a trustworthy partner, and you cannot do business with China. That is the narrative being built. But if you look at the figures, the Chinese economy is back, is booming. I mean, they had almost 25% growth in the first quarter of 2021. Record number of imports, record number of exports. There's no way you can take China off the global economic system. China today is the biggest contributor and the most important player in the global economic system.
Yeah,
India is not. India is trying to do.
Yeah,
but
it seems to be.
I think the whole what is called muddying the water. You create confusion. You muddy the water so much that people don't know what is truth and what is fiction.
And, look, and I think that's where we are.
Perception.
Sure, and I think that's where we are. I mean, I literally think that's where we are. Because right now, I am in a position of, it could have came from the lab. Maybe it didn't come from the lab. I have no idea. And I suspect that honest actors are there, even if they doubt the government's story on this. So, but Shoban, I have to end it here. The voice that you guys were listening to was Shoban Saxena, Sao Paulo-based journalist reporting on trade, culture, music, and of course, football. He previously worked as editor for the Times of India and is now working out of Brazil. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. My co-host and bro, Shane Stranahan, is typically here. He is in the independent corner with his, I'm ill. Actually, he's not feeling well. But that still means, despite the fact that Shane is not here, you're still listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, about 15,091 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 459 deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 13,900 cases per day, a decrease of 45% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 42% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 52% of the public has received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,383,096 human beings across the United States, and it has killed, put into the ground, 597,533 people. New York has stated that they will be ending the COVID-19 restrictions once the state had reached its 70% vaccination threshold. In national news, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Central America in an attempt to, international news. Kamala Harris is in Central America in an attempt to end the influx of migrants to the United States. Harris addressed the Northern Triangle, saying that, quote, if you come to our borders, you will be turned back. Many of her Democratic colleagues, like AOC, have spoken out against this move, calling it, quote, disappointing, unquote. Let's let you guys hear it for yourself. Let's play the clip. So let's do this.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
That's a wild statement for her to make. Now, this is a statement that Biden has been making the entire year, though, despite the fact that some of the policies he's changed did not necessarily work out for the best for one Joe Biden, creating somewhat of a crisis at the border. Kamala Harris is basically echoing the message, stay out. Stay out. Don't come here. Biden was accepting pretty much every kid, which created a situation where it incentivized kids to come here. The message is changing. So there's Kamala Harris. A bipartisan probe led by 2 Senate committees has found that Capitol Police were previously aware of a pro-Trump website encouraging protesters to bring firearms and other weapons to the display on January 6th. The U.S. government has recovered the majority of a $4.4 million ransom in the Colonial Pipeline hack. Donald Trump is still basically telling people that he won that election, that Joe Biden is illegitimate as the president of the United States, and that this government that we are currently under is basically bogus. Let's play the clip. Don't take it from me.
That election will go down as the crime of the century, and our country is being destroyed by people who perhaps have no right to destroy it.
I like the perhaps. The perhaps is epic. That's an epic perhaps. It's doing Herculean work. Why is that there? Does he believe that there is some chance, some percentage of a possibility that maybe they do have a reason, a rationale, or a right to destroy the globe? That's such a weird statement. Just such a weird statement. But the key point in that statement, though, is illegitimate government or illegitimate election. And by definition, the government would have to be illegitimate if it extended from that particular election. And the idea that all of these Republicans are lining up behind Trump is the whisperer. Disconcerting. The Israeli parliament will be holding a vote of confidence on the new form of government on June 14th. If confirmed, Iron Man, Teflon Don, Bibi Benjamin Netanyahu will be ousted from power after 12 years as prime minister. I will believe it when I see it. Breaking. As of an hour ago, major parts of the internet went down. Some of the affected sites include Amazon, Reddit, Twitch, Spotify, eBay, Hulu, and CNN. It seems these services are just starting to recover, but estimates show 20% of the normal internet traffic was halted, diverted, or inaccessible. Wow, that's unfortunate. Fortunately, my YouTube page was still up. Yes, I know. The WWDC 21 occurred yesterday, put on by Apple. They announced new features like AirPod tracking and the ability to add driver's license to virtual Apple wallets. Most notably, Apple is targeting Zoom and Skype with large improvements to their FaceTime applications. And last, space news. Jeff Bezos, richest man alive, richest man ever to walk the face of the earth. If I gave you $100,000 every day from the time Jesus Christ was born to now, you still wouldn't have as much money as Jeff Bezos. I think I got that math right, but I could be wrong on that. It's either 10 or 100. But you get my point. Whether it's 10 or whether 100, even if it was $1, those numbers are so extraordinary. He's so much money. Bezos is blasting himself into space aboard Blue Origin's new Shepard space shuttle on July 20th on the first human flight, making the man more than 70,000 times more valuable than the spacecraft he's on. Let me repeat that. Making the man, Jeff Bezos, on board more than 70,000 times more valuable than the rocket ship that he is bursting into space on. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You have no idea how much that headline disturbs me. Now, if Shane was here, Shane wouldn't be too bothered by the headline. I am grotesquely bothered by the headline. I don't have an issue with individuals asserting their will in this reality space. Meaning you have, the ability of dexterity, the ability of mind, you have the ability to kind of function and move around in this space. And as such, you have a finite amount of time to do whatever you're going to do within that time frame. You are radically free. There is nothing above you other than, let's say, our physical environment that inhibits, hinders, or in some way cripple your thinking process. You're free within realms. So I'm not against somebody like Bezos saying, hey, I want to build a rocket ship. I'm interested in stuff like that. My concern, and what bothers me, I think, is that Bezos is worth 70,000 times more than the rocket ship that he is on. And that with the money and the resources that he has at his disposal, you think about poverty, you think about all of these other things, he's blowing himself into space as if he's like, you know what? I need to get out of here. And I keep asking this question, can Bezos put a flag on Mars and just claim Mars? Can he claim taxes when other people come onto the planet? Now, I'm assuming you can say, well, dude, you can have a military, you can just shoot Bezos. By the same token, can Bezos buy his own military? Bezos has a lot of money. And I'm not even sure how much of that stuff is offshore. But that's a fascinating headline. I just, look, from my standpoint, and I've said it before, and yes, I know it's an ideological position and a raw ideological position at that. But if we are going into space, I would prefer us to do it united. This idea that factional moon, where part of the moon is carved up, or part of Mars is carved up, or part of these other planets is carved up. We used to have an idea that when you were in the political space in this country, if you were a political actor, despite the bad things that we will say to each other in a political space, the moment that you get on a plane and leave the confines of the United States, you leave your safety realm, your safe space, no hitting, no attacking, meaning the concerns of the country are the concerns of the country, as if it's almost like a family of sorts, 320 million oddballs within one boat. We don't necessarily have that anymore. That seemed to have basically taken a dive with Obama being in office. But I would imagine that the same thing you would think would be true if we were leaving this globe. And I like the opportunities where you would have like China, the United States, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries, regardless of their own internal concerns and problems, being able to come together, at the very least from the standpoint of scientists, and do amazing things in regards to the stuff they're sending out in space. So I like cooperation, bothered by the singular world government stuff. I mentioned another story that happened earlier where Democrats had this kind of analysis of what went wrong. Now, this is weird, right? What do you mean what went wrong? You won the election, and yet an autopsy. And like I said, an autopsy is typically used for a dead body. That body is cold, let's carve into it. But in this very specific case, the Democratic Party had an autopsy on a living corpse, them. And what they found, I'll just read it. A review of the 2020 election conducted by several prominent Democratic advocacy groups has concluded that the party is at risk of losing grounds with blacks, Hispanics, and Asian American voters unless it does a better job of presenting an economic agenda and countering the Republican efforts to spread misinformation and tie all Democrats to the far left. Now, what they're talking about there is defund the police. Now, the thing is, this didn't seem to hurt Joe Biden all that much. And I would tell you, as somebody who's a person of color, as they like to identify me, there is a belief that the Democratic Party, and I would say it's not a belief, I think it's actual flat fact reality, assumes that the black vote, or the Hispanic vote, or the gay vote, or the Asian vote, or the poor vote will go to them. And that they don't have to do anything else but be incrementally less than whatever the Republican Party is. And they've basically perfected this, getting closer and closer in regards to the things that they do using color, sexual orientation, and these other issues of identity as a way of dodging from the real world, physical matter, reality, policies that they could be passing that would put weight in a person's hand or put weight in a person's pocket where the person knows and feels, hey, that guy, that party did X or did Y, and my pocket feels a bit heavier because of it. Thank you, whoever. That's what they want. They want vision. They want the capacity for you to be able to describe and explain what you want to accomplish and why you want to accomplish it. And fact of the matter is, whether you're talking about the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, it seems that both have come to a conclusion that something is wrong or something is off, and yet are grotesquely incapable of responding to what they see as a problem. I went through the litany of items. Sanders running in 2016, scaring the bejesus out of Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. Sanders running in 2020, scaring the bejesus out of the Democratic Party. Trump beating the stuffing out of Hillary Clinton. The putsch attempt against the government, the 2 impeachments of Donald Trump, the burning police stations, the year of protests and riots. That does not bespeak of a country that is doing well. And that's not even the 600,000 people that have dropped dead based on malfeasance of this government. This does not bespeak of something that's going well. That's my point. Both of them recognize it, whether they acknowledge it or not, whether they say anything or not. You can see it based on the way that they're behaving. Under normal circumstances, these guys would not change unless they had to change. They felt that they needed to reposition. One, I don't think they thought that they could deal with the rhetoric that was coming out of Joe Biden, despite the fact that nothing else was coming out of Joe Biden except that rhetoric and just rolling back some of the things that Donald Trump did. But I also think they saw Trump as being the fastest thing moving and being able to concoct a message, putting emphasis on a message, because there's nothing under it. Trump didn't even put out a platform. But to basically the fealty and allegiance to Trump. Like I said, Liz Cheney voted with Trump like 90% of the time. It's not about your voting record. You can be a Lindsey Graham. You can be one of the other Republicans that hate Trump's guts. What you need to do is just show allegiance. You need to show submissiveness, that you bend the knee, that you would stand back there like Chris Christie looking crazy for 15 minutes as Donald Trump just basically spouted whatever he was spouting. That's what they want. That's what he needs in order to get that support. Both of these guys are harking back to what was taking place in the past, and yet ineffectual at trying to deliver it. This report is telling the Democratic Party that you need vision. You need to be able to accomplish something. You need to be able to do more than just use the theatrics of race. Hey, Kamala Harris is black-ish. Yeah, blackish. You should be happy and accept her as a gift from the Democratic Party to the black, to blacks, to African Americans. What? How about this? How about you keep her and you give us Medicare for all? Because that would be dramatically more beneficial to the people who are at the bottom of the income scale. What about the $50,000? Knocking that off the student loans. What about even the PRO Act or what was the other one? I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is there are things that were in the capacity of Biden, the marijuana thing, that he just didn't do. And this report that is pointing out ineffectual Democrats is the reason Democrats did so poorly. Wake up call. The response to this report was predictable. They blame progressives. They blame the left. They blame the left. Astonishing. Why are you so wed to this particular mode of thinking? What are the benefits? What are the incentives that entrap you so that even to the point of trying to stay in office, you're willing to ride the ship in this direction? The light at the end of the tunnel is a train. Report is giving a warning. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We have a phenomenal guest, and I'm not even going to give an intro because I'm not quite sure what kind of intro would even be adequate for the guest. I'm just going to bring her in. We're joined with senior scientist for the Office of the Chief Scientist of NASA's Human Research Program. And her name is Dr. Catherine Rahill. Dr. Rahill, thank you for joining us. I really do appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
No, absolutely. So I think Shane and I were quite impressed as we were discussing you and the appearance that we were expecting coming this week. So I am actually quite excited to have this conversation. Now, you did a report, or you did a dissertation dealing with the way optics take place on the moon, basically how people see and how people can view the world. I think you call it lunar psychophysics when they're, let's say, on the moon and they're not on planet Earth. And so if you are on Earth, there's a blue atmosphere. There is, there's all sorts of, there's an atmosphere that the light and everything else basically gives us the feeling of a color blue. If you're on Mars, I would imagine that would be red. What does it look like on the moon? And how does it affect the visual perception of the astronaut or the human being when they're on the moon, or for that matter, when they're off this planet and are looking up at the sky?
Yeah, thank you. That was a great summary. So Earth's atmosphere is very unique in the way that it scatters light, and that's how we evolved to perceive what we know to be on the visible spectrum. And it's actually just a sliver of what actually exists on the whole light spectrum, which, is out there in space. And the filtering capabilities of our atmosphere allow an equal diffusion of light across surfaces, making perception of depth and distance very easy for us to perceive. On the moon, however, light scattering is very dramatic. It can scatter in ways that can either completely blind you or conceal objects to the point where they just blend into the blackness of space and you completely miss them altogether, even if they're right in front of you.
So wait, real quick. So when a person, let's say I'm blasted into space and I land on the moon and I am in my flight suit, I say one small step for man and I am awesome, and I walk out of the spacecraft, what does it look like? Like, what am I saying? Is it just the blackness of space? Does it look white because of the ground? What is the astronaut seeing? Like, what does it look like to him? Like, I know what you mean when you're saying the visual perception is screwy because of the way light scatters. It throws him off. But be specific about that for me. I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of it. What does he look at? Like, what is it? Just inky blackness? What's he seeing?
So it depends on where you actually land on the moon. So obviously we want to land on what we call the bright side of the moon, because usually, if you were to actually go onto a part of the moon where there is no sun visible, then it would be complete blackness. You wouldn't be able to see your hand in front of you.
Dark side of the moon.
Yes.
Very cool. Okay, so at that point, that would just be inky blackness. But if you're on the other side of the moon, that's not the dark side. At that point, you will have light. But the light is not necessarily reflecting in the way that we would typically see it on Earth.
Correct. And depending on the elevation of the sun, where you are at the moon, the shadows can become very dramatic. They can become very steep. And we've actually have had astronauts document just almost how scary it looks. It's very unfamiliar to us. We're not used to seeing shadows that dramatic. And it can make it very difficult to actually perceive distances and slopes. And often, astronauts either underestimated distances, upwards of miles, or if the light was too bright, depending on their position to the sun, they would actually run into craters while they were driving on their lunar rovers.
Is that why they were always falling over? I mean, I know the gravity played an aspect of it, but is it also because of their inability to kind of see in a typical way? I mean, if you were just walking and light wasn't reflecting in a way that you were typically accustomed to, how do you take that next step? And what does that next step look like if you're trying to take that next step?
Yeah, it is a combination of, microgravity on the vestibular system and your visual perception of the horizon. So if you don't have a steady visual perception of the horizon, which requires you to be able to see properly due to light scattering, then yeah, it definitely would make it very difficult to see on the moon. And so it was a combination of that. They got very confused. What their eyes were telling them, what they were seeing, was not what their body was telling them they were experiencing.
What does that do to a person?
A lot of times we call it, space sickness. Astronauts can get very nauseous, disoriented. We have medications for that on the ISS, but we certainly didn't have those back in the Apollo missions.
Very interesting. So the Apollo missions, Neil Armstrong had no idea what he was going to come across, or did he? I mean, was this something that was discussed during those first forays onto the moon? Or was this something he just experienced, where he came back, reported, and it was kind of more investigation into what was taking place? I guess I'm trying to get it, how far extrapolated, or how much was his experience extrapolated correctly?
They really weren't sure exactly how much it would affect them. We did, space flight testing before the Apollo missions, but we really relied on the astronauts' experiences to come back and tell us what it was like. And there were a lot of common themes in terms of the way that they could perceive light on the moon and the difficulties they had in vision.
Wow, that is uber interesting. And I would imagine the same thing would apply to Mars. I mean, is it just the scattering of light being different from Earth creates visual disturbances in general?
Mars is a little bit of a better situation. It has a very thin atmosphere, not breathable, but it's a little bit thicker. So it scatters light a little bit more. It scatters light more similarly to Earth than the moon, certainly. And interestingly enough, actually, it has an inverse light scattering effect where there is a red sky and a blue sunset on Mars.
Oh, that is so wild.
Yeah.
I am such a sucker for this stuff. Like I am so enamored by it. I think Shane is too. We're both into tech and everything else, but I'm really enamored by just the science of what you have to think of, and knowing that you're not going to think of it all, and still having to be, relying on the training, relying on kind of the science that backed up all of the research to get them to the point where they can go there, having a general idea. So how do you train them for this? Do you have systems that can basically interrogate the environment for the astronaut and recreate it in a way that they can walk? Can they use infrared in order to kind of scatter or to like different fields of vision or different wavelengths of trying to view that stuff? How do you guys mitigate that effect?
So we have different virtual simulations that, we can run our astronauts through. That's actually something NASA's really working on right now, because now that we're going to be staying on the moon for longer periods of time, we're going to have to kind of come up with a long-term solution that can help astronauts accommodate visually what they see.
Right.
It could be either through augmented displays on their EVA spaces, or a combination of virtual training as well.
So astronauts are going to be staying on the moon for longer periods of time. So what are the missions expectations coming up for NASA in regards to astronauts? I mean, because look, I think it's a great thing. I think when we were organized around this kind of vision of space exploration, science, tech, and everything else during the Kennedy and this kind of, yes, it was for issues of war and peace. By the same token, though, you still had a huge amount of people who got into sciences, who looked up with a certain degree of this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be. And I think those things are magnificently valuable. Are they going to put astronauts on the moon for long-term habitation? And do they have plans of building structures that people will be there perpetually?
Yeah, so upcoming in this decade, we are going to have our Artemis mission. Those are going to start off similarly to the Apollo missions, in that we're going to do a couple cislunar orbits just to get a feel for how we are going to create a stable orbit around the moon for our gateway system. And what our gateway system is going to provide us is eventually a docking system that allows astronauts to leave Earth, come to the moon, spend a few days in orbit, go down to the surface, do their experiments, come back up, and then from there, it's going to serve as a docking system and kind of a waypoint for launching to Mars in the future.
Oh, that is going to be phenomenal. That's amazing. Let's do this. Let's take a break because we're almost at the end of the hour. The voice that you guys are listening to is Dr. Catherine Rahill. She's a senior scientist for the Office of Chief Scientist of NASA's Human Research Program. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us is a great guest, senior scientist for the Office of Chief Scientist of NASA's Human Research Program, Dr. Catherine Rahill. Again, thank you for joining us, or continuing to join us, I should say. So say I get into a spaceship and say they blast me off to Mars. And let's say the trip takes 6 months. Special engines, they're phenomenal, everything else. I get there in 6 months. It's a small space. I can't walk out into the sunlight. I can't, go running in the park. If I feel blue or claustrophobic, I'm stuck with that particular feeling. What are the things the astronauts have to train psychologically for a trip like that? I mean, I would imagine you can't just use pretty much anybody. I would imagine there has to be a certain type of personality. How do you evaluate the personality in and of itself to quantify it in order to determine person? But on top of that, how do you train and prepare somebody for not basking in the sunlight for like 6 months?
Great question. So for our astronaut candidate program, we do a very long series of psychological test batteries just to screen them to see if they are qualified. Once we finish our selection, we have our astronauts undergo a lot of isolation, expeditionary experiences. Usually within the first 2 years of their candidate program, we send them up to Cold Lake up in Alberta, which is negative sub-zero degree temperatures at certain times of the year. We have stations in Antarctica where they go to train. We also have a lot of isolation experiments at across our NASA installations in Hawaii, Johnson Space Center, where we study participants in real time when they are enclosed in a space-like environment for up to a year. And we study them very extensively. So that's how we psychologically prepare our astronauts for long-term space travel.
Well, what does loneliness do to a person? I mean, like you say, you guys are doing experiments. It's not just, training. It's also, okay, we're researching in order to better prepare the astronauts and the people who are coming after the astronauts. So the loneliness experiments, basically, and, I'm not dinging them, just basically what it sounds like they are. What have you found that loneliness does to a human being over that period of time?
Mental health equates to physical health. So we tend to see some physical side effects as well that can really impact the mission. So we focus a lot on communication strategies for long term.
And wait, just so we're clear what we're talking about, if the individual starts to feel sluggish, starts to feel bad, their nerves get frayed. And as their nerves get frayed, the relationships start to break down. Is that what you mean by that? When you're saying, it's like we're trying to keep their physical health up, and so we're trying to deal with the communication issues. So when their physical health breaks down, inevitably, they don't basically, try to kill each other out of a hangry rage, as they call it. But I hope you get my point. I'm being slightly jovial about it. But basically, you're trying to keep their health up, and you know that over the course of the mission that there's going to be some kind of decline. And so you're working on strategies of communication to ensure that the people can still engage one another when they're not at their physical peaks. Am I explaining that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We assign our teams very strategically. We make sure that we don't have too many strong personalities in one room. And by one room, I mean, one spacecraft. We learned a lot from that on shuttle missions, actually.
What do you mean? What happened?
So, astronauts are very high-achieving individuals, and back, in the Apollo and the shuttle eras, we really looked at performance. We looked at, your credentials. Personality came second, but when we started doing these 2-week missions on the shuttle program, if we had a couple trouble astronauts, we would hear about it. People wouldn't want to do a mission with them. It would make it very difficult. You need to have strong camaraderie when you're in an isolated environment that is confined as the shuttle. And so, that's why we have our astronauts very involved in the selection process. We need to make sure that, they're nice people. They're easy to get along with. That's very important.
How do you measure and quantify personalities?
We have a series of personality tests that we do. They're much more intensive than your average personality test that I'm sure a lot of people take online. We have a lot of multidimensionality ones, mostly proprietary, just so, we keep those kind of...
Yeah, secret.
For that reason, so people can't cheat the system and try and do that perfect cookie cutter, on paper. We really try and be as thorough as we can for selection.
But I would imagine that has to also have an interpersonal component, meaning that I would imagine there has to be a psychologist somewhere in this mix, engaging this individual over a period of time to ensure that the person is not just giving you what you think you want. Or is that true?
We have a lot of psychologists that work for NASA that focus on selection, team's performance, how to enhance both their actual performance on tasks and also their interpersonal relationships with each other.
Speaking about interpersonal relationships, we had a caller, and maybe you can help our caller. He might be out there listening now. And he made the point that says his girlfriend was not going to touch him if he didn't get his COVID vaccine. And he was trying to basically say, well, she's a capitalist, and because she's a capitalist, she's morally culpable to things that happen in the world. So how is she giving me the strife with the COVID stuff? Now, How do you teach them communication methods to help these two couples, this couple? Like, meaning, and again, I'm trying to be jovial and maybe this falling flat, but I guess what I'm getting at is at some point when these guys are relying on, let's say, the techniques, what are those techniques? Like, how are you training them to try to deal with what they expect? Because I would imagine it says, look, guys, you're going to feel this way during the trip. Okay. We need you to prepare for feeling that way. Okay. And then it's like, all right, now we feel that way. What are the techniques that you've taught them? They're 4 months in.
Yeah, we do a lot of teams training. The most important thing is to talk about your problems if you have one. The mission is the ultimate priority. And so if there's anything that might get in the way of a mission, it's very important to address it in an amicable way.
Yeah.
And astronauts are very, well trained in that in terms of their communication skills. They have to be, mission first, always, and their safety is also a priority. And so communication is vital to that.
Why did you get into this field? I'm curious. Was there something that just kind of inspired your fascination with psychology and space? What was the hook?
I've always had a strong fascination with space exploration. I think it's something bigger than us, and that's something that really gives me a drive to keep uncovering new areas of science and, working towards a cause like this. It's historical. You're making a lot of milestones happen when you are involved in this type of work. And that's really what drives me, is that, the work will certainly extend far and beyond my years. And that's something that's very rewarding to me.
Human milestones, not just individual milestones.
Yeah.
What have you guys learned in your experimentation that you didn't know prior? Like, just in the general experimentation, either with the psychology of astronauts, either with the loneliness stuff, either with sending these items into space. It can even be with the visual acuity issues associated with the item that you wrote your dissertation on. What are some of the big items that you mentioned, these actual milestones of being at the forefront of science and whatnot? What would be one of the main ones?
Need to, on our spaceships, make sure astronauts take a little piece of Earth with them. When you're confined in an isolated, environment where the air is just circumvented and filtered through, you don't get any earth smells, the sounds, birds chirping. That's something that actually, the sound of rain hitting leaves is actually something that astronauts really value, especially when they've been gone for extended periods of time. So we're really trying to incorporate that into the spacecraft and make sure they have a little piece of earth with them, and also growing vegetation as well, so they can experience, greens and things like that, and give them a little better taste of home.
What about the scientific discoveries regarding optics and optics off-world?
So astronauts tend to, there's about a 50% chance that when you go to space, the anatomical structure of your eye is going to shift. It's going to change shape, and that can either...
because of water. It's going to... okay.
Sorry, the shape of your eye can actually shift in space due to changes in fluid distribution, which can cause some detrimental vision effects. But for some astronauts, it makes them have perfect vision if they didn't have it already.
Very interesting. That's so weird. That's so strange. I guess I get it if you had like a ball of water and it was just floating in space. Well, it would become a circle. And your eye is basically a fluid sac. But it's not just your eye is a fluid sac. We're 70% water. What happens to the person?
So on microgravity, everything shifts upwards. So astronauts tend to get a little bit of a puffy face. It's very important that they have clear sinusoidal cavities, and, we do screen for that. If you have sinus problems or anything like that, you'd probably be disqualified from that just because of the fluid shifts that happen and the intracranial pressure on the brain. We kind of call this phenomenon, too, what happens to their legs, called chicken legs, because all of the fluid and a lot of the blood shifts upward, and it actually causes astronauts' legs to kind of become thinner during that time. So working out is also very key to keep up that muscle mass.
When an astronaut is standing on the moon, or in space in general, and they are looking at Earth either for the first time or in general, or let's say like a Neil Armstrong or Aldrin, I would imagine at some point they looked up at the black sky and stars and whatnot. Do they come back and have to kind of give these kind of exit interviews in regards to what they were thinking, feeling, almost like a purge session? And if so, what was their take on that? I mean, did they have this kind of like awe? Was it this kind of this thing of wonder of sorts in regards to the vastness of it? What were they thinking? And I don't even know if this was something that took place. It just seems like something would be logical that would take place.
So, astronauts have strong psychosomatic reactions when they see Earth for the first time. They all come back and they just, they say, just how small they feel and how insignificant they feel. And especially when they're looking at the world, they don't see borders. They don't see anything, like that, we're constantly exposed to down here in the media, and just the news and everything like that. So they come back with a much more grander understanding of human existence, and it gives them a really strong appreciation for that. And it certainly validates, the work that they do.
That's very interesting. I can totally see why. I mean, you're basically, it's profound on some level. For the entirety of your life, for let's say 99.99999%, you're going to be stuck on the ground, wearing a pair of shoes and jeans or flip-flops or whatever else. And in this, one terrific moment, these guys were able to basically peer out in something that the overwhelming majority of the public would never see over the context of multiple lifetimes. Like, so I could see how almost like a religiosity or an awe is like kind of associated with seeing something like that, and even this kind of new perspective shift in regards to humanity itself. I'm curious, what are your goals going forward in regards to the science of optics? What's the next step for you in regards to this research?
Certainly to get it published. It's under review right now for publication, so that's my immediate goal. Secondly, it's to incorporate, our understanding of vision into the bigger picture of, just the biological, ecological, and physiological capabilities or features or resources that we have to, enhance the overall performance of astronauts. So basically
Wait, what do you mean? Explain that. You mean like gene research, or you mean just nutritional assistance? Like, how far are you trying to go with it? Are we going to give astronauts gills, for example?
Oh, yeah. So, my research, is to continue this research. So once we have this solved, it's just another piece to the puzzle, and then we kind of have to go on to the next big thing. Now, that next big thing is probably, something along the lines of cardiovascular issues or space radiation, which is a serious problem that we're still tackling. So that's kind of what's on, the future horizon.
The space radiation stuff. I've heard reports of astronauts who they would say how they would see these lights flashing in their eyes. It would be like this kind of explosion in the back of their eye. And doing these kind of micro analysis of the suits, you can even see like where I guess high energy particles were hitting the suits and hitting them, causing these kind of like small damages. Water. Is water a solution to that? Meaning surrounding the ship in this kind of layer of water, would that be one of the things that basically stop that effect from taking place? And is that effect dangerous? I mean, meaning, going forward as they, going through space and going to Mars and everything else, they're going to be exposed to those things more readily. How is NASA prepared to respond to that?
We have entertained the idea of using water, but I'm not sure that's going to be the prime way that we're going to do it. But, we always have to keep an open mind.
It doesn't have to be water. That was just that was a solution that I heard somebody mention. I was going to just.
Yeah. So, we've come up, with a few different options. We've even looked into mining asteroid materials to shield us from radiation. But of course, that would require us to go out there and get that first, which isn't, an immediate viable solution. And so we've been looking at certain different shielding materials, but understanding how radiation impacts us at the cellular level is extremely important. Genetic mutation is something that we've seen happen in both animal and human in terms of radiation exposure,
right?
In space and on the ground.
Okay, so if you guys are going to Mars, that has to be something that's a part of it. I mean, I would imagine otherwise, because I don't think you guys will put the astronauts in a position that's unsafer, if otherwise that could help. And for the last question on this, cardiovascular is going to be the thing that you're going to next, just so I'm clear.
Yes.
And what about the cardiovascular system, just the way that it works in space and how to improve the functioning and capabilities of the cardiovascular system of astronauts in space?
Yeah, so it's similar to the fluid shift that I was discussing previously, where, our heart works in a very particular way in gravity, or what we call 1G. But the way that the heart pumps blood in space is a little bit different. It doesn't have to work as hard, mainly because, in those upper artery areas. So we have to make sure that those, remain strengthened, because on re-entry, astronauts can experience very high Gs, and we don't want any of those arteries to weaken to the point where there's a chance of tearing when they're under extreme stress after not having to work as effectively for 6 months to a year.
And two questions. I'm sorry. I know I said that was the last one, but two more that brought up another question. The Challenger, when the Challenger blew up, I know each and every astronaut believes that the technology and the people that are working for them are doing the best that they can for this notion of this noble goal of exploration. But they also have to know that this is radically dangerous and that there have been mistakes in the past where these things have blown up as they go up. How do they mentally prepare for that? And not just them mentally prepare for that, even getting their family members, a wife, a husband, a spouse. How do they get those relatives, not just themselves, in a mental headspace for that?
That's a really great question. NASA takes, astronaut families very seriously. And so for each mission, an astronaut asks, a fellow astronaut on the ground to look after their families. And that astronaut is responsible for taking care of the families whenever they need anything, escorting them to and from the launch site. And families are briefed by NASA. It is a group team effort, and families are aware of the risks. But NASA is there for them every step of the way of that. They really value, the sacrifices that family make to, have their, father, mother, brother, sister, take that kind of, career path. And so we do our best to make sure that the families are taken care of, that we have someone on call for them whenever astronauts are in flight. And, we have a lot of resources for them, too, as well.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Dr. Catherine Rayhill, thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate this. Catherine Rayhill is a scientist for the Office of Chief Scientist of NASA's Human Research Program. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. This is going to be an open segment. You guys can call in. The number is 202. Let's see, I should know that off the top of my head right now. Most of the time I do. 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. And the lines are open, or maybe they are not. No, the lines are open for the calls. And look, we can talk about pretty much anything, right? We've had multiple subjects on. Dr. Rayhill is astonishing. Like, when you think about it, you're standing on another planet, and all of your typical faculties that allow you to exist on this planet, things would seem perfectly normal to you. You would even call it normality. And the thing is, there is no normality. It's just relative to who you are and where you are. The moment that you go to another planet, the normality on that planet is you not having the capability of seeing ahead of you and tripping over yourself over and over again, or riding your little buggy into little mountains. That was a really interesting interview. Like, some of that stuff you don't necessarily think of in advance of being potentially on one of those worlds. And so, no, she is a phenomenal guest. We have to get her back. She is like physics, psychology. She runs the gambit in regards to the things that she can talk about and the conversations she can have. Going to one of the stories that's in the headlines for the moment. And again, the call lines are open, 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So going back to the headlines for the moment. The Trump thing, I know a lot of people look at what is taking place in regards to Trump, just basically saying, oh, it's bogus, the election is fraudulent, et cetera, and think of it, well, that's just Trump being Trump. That Trump has always been that way. That's just the way Trump acts. But so what? Just because that's the way Trump acts doesn't necessarily make it great, and nor does the effect of 30 million people not believing that the president is the president because he got in office illegitimately. And mind you, as Shane points out, this is after the previous administration, Donald Trump, was basically called illegitimate, and Obama was basically called illegitimate because of a birth certificate by the same Donald Trump. This is not a good process. We have Nate from Atlanta on Venezuelan diplomat. Nate, what's going on, man?
Hey, I heard this on a radio yesterday. So it's about a Venezuelan diplomat that's currently in house arrest in Cape Verde. The U.S. forced the plane, the plane that he was on, I think heading to Iran, down in Africa. He was in jail for a long time without any sunlight or anything like that.
So right here.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So right here, this is Reuters. Cape Verde Supreme Court rules on extradition of Maduro envoy. So the guy that was a diplomat is now an envoy. Cape Verde Supreme Court ruled on Wednesday to allow the extradition to the United States of Alex Saab, a businessman close to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, a decision his lawyer vowed to appeal. The ruling defies an order this week from a regional West African court for Saab's release. The Colombian businessman, who was detained in Cape Verde last June, is wanted by U.S. authorities on charges of laundering money on behalf of Venezuelan government. So one court says, let him go. And the United States court says, yeah, who cares about that other court? We're going to extradite him. So right here, responding to the Supreme Court decision in a statement, his defense team said, we will appeal to the Constitutional Court and reaffirm our confidence in the release of Ambassador Saab. Very interesting. And this is basically what they're accusing or complaining about from the standpoint of where is it? There we are. Yeah, of Belarusian leader Lukashenko. And so, hypocrisy, man. Thank you, Nate. I appreciate that call. We have Devon from D.C. on UFOs. Uh-oh. And by the way, Devon, we have another subject coming up. It's funny. This week, this month, was supposed to be the month that they released the documents. And so it seems like there's a level of hysteria about this that is insane. I mean, there's reports from China, from Russia, from Japan, from et cetera, that's basically bubbling up in the news now. And yet people were basically talking that would have never said anything before. And you think to yourself, these guys knew this the entire time and never said anything. It's like that weird, heady feeling. But Devon, what do you want to talk about? What's the subject matter?
Hey, Shane, Jamarl. Jamarl, this is more of a question for you. Assume for a second the UFO sightings are us, are the U.S., it is Russia.
Yeah.
There's, some of these other governments. What's the fascination with such technology if at some point it's going to be exploited for its military purposes, which, if history has shown us, has been used against, which may be used against, the civilian population?
Well, if you notice, Devon, I haven't been excited about this. I haven't been excited about that. If you notice, my arguments and the conversations that I have about disclosure, it almost takes two tracks. It's this track of, oh man, this is going to be chaotic. If you look at my interviews, whether I'm talking to Elizondo or I'm talking to Stephen Bassett, in all of those interviews, I get across a certain degree of trepidation that you may have these guys who, I don't know the reason that this information is coming out. So there's that first. But on top of that, it's like they may be kumbaya now, dealing with this issue, but what about 10 years? What about the next group of politicians who this information, this mystery is a normality of sorts? And yeah, the tech, the information, and all that stuff gets used for military application and subjugation. Yes, that is a huge concern of mine. I mean, think about it, what it means for the moment. It's a radical departure in your world in a technological sense. You've mastered gravity, which is basically what this would have to mean if the reports are right. And so let's say that's a black budget project. As a black budget project, you should still know that. Because if you don't know that, it would only be used for military application. That's the first point. So the task force, whether it's us or not us, both of those things are profound considering what we're seeing. And both of those things need to be brought to the light of day, to the public. We're putting billions into stuff that we don't have access to and can't reap the benefits of. And so I feel you, Devon. It's not that I love this part of it. I've become very cynical of this process. I used to be the guy standing outside with the Space Brother sign saying, welcome to Earth. I am not that guy anymore. I am far more cynical of what I think this is going to look like taking place in real world, physical matter reality. And not just from politicians, not just from, let's say, the way the military deals with it, not just from the way the science deals with it, not just from the way tech deals. Yeah, it's a radical shift, whether it's us or not, because of what it means and what it means from the standpoint of our capabilities regarding science. And for my take, I think it's both. I do think we have tech like that. Why wouldn't we have tech like that? Somebody would have had to be doing a disservice and failed miserably if we didn't have 20, 30 years ahead in regards to tech. You see some people sometimes and they'll be like, this is 1 trillion years ahead of us. And it's like, why do you think that? Like, how do you even know that? How do you know that within the course of, let's say, 10 years, that somebody stumbles upon something that says, hey, we can use this to manipulate this? How do you know? And if you think science exponentially expands upon itself, then that means that the rate of your technological development will just expand exponentially. It's difficult to make that point of view of saying we are X number of years ahead of that, 100. We don't know. It's just phenomenal tech. That's all. Devon, thank you for the call, man. I agree with you. I'm concerned. I have my concerns. I don't have rosy glasses on with this. I think there is it's almost like a singularity you can't see on the other side of it. Like, what does your world look like? I mean, are you going to have, the moment there's something like that, except for the moment that is us. Take everything else off the table. Now, if you do that, though, you have a lot of stuff to explain based on our own tech and our own sciences. But assume for the moment that it is us. There's a lot of explaining that we need to do. And you may even have a situation where you have one aspect knocking on the side of another aspect that it doesn't know anything about. So who knows? It is very interesting. It is odd, to say the least. And look, the report is supposed to come out in June at the end of the month. New York Times has already, I guess you could say, leaked what's going to be in it. But at the end of the day, we're just going to have to see what they give us in regards to the cases and everything else. But Devon, I do share your concern. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your contact lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. And my co-host, who's not feeling well today, Shane Stranahan, is the independent of this channel, as you want to call him that, even though Shane is not entirely independent. But either way, you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's do this. Let's get to the last headline of the show. This is the 9 o'clock hour. We've had a really interesting show in regards to the topics of conversation. We had an opportunity to have a conversation with Shoban Saxena, who was making the point about, there was a story that came out of Newsweek about the new Wuhan lab leak, and again, pointing it to China. He was making a point that they're basically taking anonymous sources and people who are on Twitter and using that as a club to hit China with. Very interesting conversation. We also got into the foreign policy element of this, with India taking this particular story and running with it, being one of the countries that was adversely affected in huge measure, second only to the United States. We also had the opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Rahill, and she is basically a NASA scientist dealing with luminosity and the vision acuity issues associated with astronauts or human beings being off-world, meaning the way they look at their world itself is affected by it. What they see doesn't necessarily correspond to what they're feeling. And it's a very interesting conversation. So definitely check those out. But let's get to our headlines. In the news, about 15,091 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 459 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 13 13,900 cases per day, a decrease of 45% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 42% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 52% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,383,096 people across the United States and has killed 597,533 mothers, daughters, babysitters, human beings. New York has stated that it will be ending its COVID-19 restrictions once the state has reached its 70% vaccination threshold. A bipartisan probe led by two Senate committees has found that Capitol Police were previously aware of pro-Trump website encouraging protesters to bring firearms and other weapons to display on January 6th, and yet failed to respond to that knowledge. The government has received the majority of the $4.4 million ransom in the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. The Israeli parliament will be holding a vote of no confidence. Will be holding a vote of confidence on the new form of government on July on June 14th. If confirmed, Benjamin Netanyahu will be ousted from power after 12 years as prime minister. Vice President Kamala Harris is in Central America in an attempt to end an influx of migrants to the United States southern borders. Harris addressed the Northern Triangle, saying that, quote, "If you come to our borders, you will be turned back." Many of her Democratic colleagues like AOC have spoken out against this move, calling it, quote, "disappointing," unquote. Let's play the clip of Harris telling migrants to stay the F out of America.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
That is amazing. That's an amazing statement. Kamala Harris, our vice president. As of 7 a.m. today, major parts of the internet went down. Some of the affected sites include Amazon, Reddit, Twitch, Spotify, eBay, Hulu, CNN, and even the British government's website. It seems these services are not just starting to recover, but estimates show nearly 20% of normal internet traffic was halted, diverted, or inaccessible. The sun never goes down on the British Empire, but apparently the internet does. The WWD21 DC21 occurred yesterday, put on by Apple. They announced new features like Find My AirPods tracking and the ability to add driver's license to virtual Apple wallets. Most notably, Apple is targeting Zoom and Skype with large improvements to their FaceTime application. And last, billionaire Jeff Bezos has stated that he will be aboard Blue Origin's new Shepard space shuttle on July 20th on his first human flight, making the man on board more than 70,000 times more valuable than the spaceship that he is riding in. That number is astonishing. You guys, those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. 70,000 times more. Look, on some level, I respect that. Jeff Bezos is basically saying, I trust my product that I built, crafted with my own hands and brains. I'm Jeff Bezos. I did it all. I did it all. Give me all the money. I did it all. I'm going to be on that ship. I'm going to put my life on the line, leaving this planet, the only planet where all of my wealth has actual value. And I'm going to do that to show the level of confidence that I have in this ship. And everybody who's looking at me and everybody who's looking at my company, instead of me sending up a stupid little moon man in a Tesla flying around the planet, I, Jeff Bezos, will put myself up to fly around the globe. I can respect that on some level, right? I mean, it's basically showing confidence in his product and putting his life on the line in order to do so. That is going to be a ship. That ship is going to be basically a tin can with with rockets on the back of it. It will be blast off into the space, into the sky, and Bezos will need the tech, the mechanics, all of that stuff to go correct. And Bezos would not put his life on the line if he didn't think it would work. The other catch to this, though, is capitalistic incentive. Bezos doing this shows confidence in his product. It shows confidence to the degree that, yes, I'm going to put my life on the line for this product. And everybody else who's around, who's looking at these companies, are going to think, that might be a good company. Bezos believes in this company so much, he's basically putting himself in his own craft. It's an interesting move. It's a good PR stunt on some level. Not to mention, honestly, if I was Bezos, I would do the same thing. And I would do it. It would have nothing to do with the other parts. It would just be, I would get to go to space. I built this company. It's my company. I built my ships, just like Batman has his stuff on the side. I'm Jeff Bezos. I have my stuff on the side. I'm at least as rich as Bruce Wayne. Why not? And in this case, this is his pet peeve. So, I mean, this is his pet issue. So, good for Bezos, I suppose. Specifically good for Bezos. The other story I want to get to is Kamala Harris and the Central America thing. That clip is amazing. Andre, could you prime that clip one more time for me? I'll give you a few moments to get it. The idea that an American president or vice president will wag their finger at South America is astonishing. And if you notice, if you look at Psaki and the conversations that typically take place, there are boundaries to those conversations when you're talking about South America. Even when Biden talks about this stuff, it's never in the context of U.S. policy in South America. It is always in the context of earthquakes, fires, floods, riots, calamity, etc., etc., etc. Corruption, bad governance. And while I accept the corruption part, I even accept bad governance on some level. Let's be honest with one another. 3 a.m. between you and your God, how do you take our policies, be it the drug wars, be it this kind of Monroe Doctrine of knocking over the various governments or the leaders of the various governments that we thought were too far deviant to the left, and these guys were basically FDR Democrats? Yeah, you can't take the calamity that is in South America without taking the foreign policy that assisted in that calamity. It's never an honest conversation. If you try to find some way to give some level of reparations to boost those countries up, to boost let's say the economic output of those countries where surplus, or at the very least, a decent environment to which the people will want to live in, or at the very least stay in, or at the very least not want to throw themselves out of. If you are living in a situation where there are drug gangs, and those drug gangs are killing people. In Mexico, they threw a severed head, at some kind of voting booth or something. If that's your world, and you're growing up with kids like that, do you send them away? Do you love them enough to send them away? Now, that's a heartbreaking thing to have to consider and have to think about, that your kid is better off elsewhere because you either can't keep them safe, either you can't keep them fed, or the conditions that they're living in are rather dire. How do you as an American create a situation at your border patrol that is worse than the conditions to which they're coming out of? And if we indeed had some level of assistance in those conditions, how do you ignore it and act like that's not there? It's just very weird watching the press conferences when they're dancing around. It's some level of culpability in it. Look, if you want the people to stop coming, yelling at them is not the way to do it. Bolstering the countries where the countries are not roving with drug gangs is. Honduras and that guy who's supposed to be a partner of the United States, but the criminal case had it where apparently he was trying to put cocaine into the nose of every gringo, as it was said. 80% of the cocaine that went through South America ended up going through Honduras. We knocked that country over because we didn't like the guy that was running it. I'm saying these things have consequences, and we still do it, despite the consequences, meaning despite all of those people coming to the border, despite the basket cases that have been left in the wake of some of these coups and some of these escapades. That even now, Juan Guaido is president of Venezuela. Juan Guaido didn't win an election in a pie shop. And yet, they walked around as if this guy was somehow supposed to be the leader of a country entirely because the U.S. willed it so. All of those Venezuelans, too bad they weren't Americans. They would have been able to choose what was right for Venezuela. It's just very strange and very weird when these conversations take place, especially when these conversations take place on immigrations, especially when immigration from the standpoint of the South. Yes, we're going to export our interests, our needs. But no, stay out. Stay out. Or, in the words of Kamala Harris, don't come. Do not come. That's just unfortunate. The thing is, if you have to be honest and if you have to acknowledge potential actions, then you also have to acknowledge the potential ramifications of those actions, meaning consequences. What is the conditions of the people on the ground, and are you responsible in some way? And what does it mean to be responsible? How do you reconcile that? And is it possible that the only way to stop the people from flooding your border is by ensuring that they are at the very least whole? This is not a problem in Canada. It's a problem in the poor countries. Problem in poor countries. So yeah, Kamala Harris telling people to not come. And by the way, let's play this clip real quick. I called it up and didn't play it. Let's play the clip.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
Now, I said South America. When I say South America, I'm just talking about the foreign policy over the course of 50, 60 years during this notion of the Monroe Doctrine. I think it was more than 50. It was like 100 years. But she's in Central America. I believe she's in Guatemala, just to be specific and precise. I don't want people to get the wrong impression. But look, that's what is taking place in our headlines. Those are our main headlines. I'm going to end it here. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with a very interesting take from abroad. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone. Your engagement helps make the show what it is. There is a fascinating story that came out of Canada. Now, oftentimes when people are talking about the UFO stuff, we have a report that is supposed to be coming up this month. I wish I could say it's any day, but it's unclear. And it was even talked that the report was going to get punted because it was being stonewalled and they needed additional information. So at this point, we're just waiting. Everybody is abuzz. And all of these media outlets have been running these stories. And so one of the stories that was ran by Vice. Oftentimes, people ask, I've even asked this question, why the United States? Why does it seem like the United States is the energy behind this very specific issue right now? Why is it the one that's screaming to high heaven that there's something there? We don't know what it is. We're not saying it's aliens, but there's something there. Why nobody else? And the answer is, it's not just the United States. There are other nations. And the reports of that stuff have been coming out. One of those nations, of course, is our neighbor to the north, Canada. Canada has been experiencing this phenomena for apparently 70 years, at least based on this report by Vice News. And to have a conversation about this report and some of the reports that these guys were experiencing, I'm joined with Daniel Otis. Daniel Otis is a camera-wielding journalist who covers travel, trials, and almost everything in between. You can find his news and feature stories in outlets like the Toronto Star, Vice, CTV News, The Globe and the Mail, Sunset, Al Jazeera, Roads and Kingdoms, The Diplomat, Slate, Southeast Asia Globe, Next City, and The Monthly. Daniel, you are very accomplished, and I am greatly appreciative of somebody with this many credentials or this many publications to their name joining me. Thank you for joining me, man. And, and by the way, I'm not being facetious about that. I'm actually being serious. I mean, this is a ton of, it's credibility, I guess, on some level, if that makes sense, to have this many publications and be able to write on this wide array of topics. So, yeah, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much.
So I was reading through this report that you wrote on Vice, And the name of the report is, or the name of the article is, "The Canadian Military Has Been Encountering UFOs for Decades, Documents Show." And it says, "Thorough access to information requests, public records, and exclusive interviews, Vice World News has uncovered nearly 70 years of UFO cases involving Canadian military." And as I read through, I was fascinated with some of these and some of the things that the people were saying. Like in one case, right here, it says they weren't chasing the Russians. So, right, I just read this part. John Patrick McManus, who served in Canadian Armed Forces from 1960 to 1984, was with two soldiers when he spotted a UFO at CFB Shiloh in Manitoba in the spring of 1981. With a moment or two, it shot directly away from us, diminishing in brightness as it disappeared at a fantastic speed, he said. When it was gone, I looked at these young guys and they were absolutely gobsmacked because they couldn't figure it out more than I could. I've seen a UFO in Egypt. I am in a car. My wife and I, we've just gotten from the airport. And there is something in the sky that starts off like just a little beetle light, and it blows up to like a sun with this like magnificent luminosity. And I grabbed my wife immediately, like, "Oh my God, look at this, look at this." And the car immediately ducks under like a bridge, which is basically, gone. Now, could that have been a plane that was railing its lights in some kind of weird way? Potentially. I've never seen anything like it where it blew up like that. I've seen other YouTube videos or something like that where people was like, "This is what we saw while we were out," something like that. That was the first time seeing it. And so these guys, though, are experiencing this in military installations. And, it's not like people who are untrained in regards to vision. They're military, man. Their job on some level is their ability to appraise their environment and to be able to accurately and pragmatically deal with what they're encountering in that environment. And if they were calling swamp gas everything that they saw, they wouldn't necessarily do their job all that well. How many of these stories were you guys able to uncover as you were going through the stories? And what story stood out to you the most as you were being given these?
Well, for the most recent piece I did on Canadian military sightings, I uncovered about a dozen cases dating back from the early 1950s up through the 2000s. That was for the military story. In the case that the ones that interested me the most are actually two cases because they happened at the exact same base, more than 55 years apart.
Yeah.
In 1952, at a base called CFB North Bay, which is in the province of Ontario, a bunch of Air Force officers saw an odd light that sort of darted across the sky and reported it. At the same base in 2007, more than a dozen military personnel, including some U.S. Air Force personnel that were at the base, saw a very unusual light hovering above the base before dawn. And in both cases, they were reported, formal reports were filed. One of my contacts said something interesting to me. They said that there's such stigma against reporting these things and talking about these things within the military that if someone is reporting it, we ought to listen to them because, most people's inclinations are to just keep their mouth shut and not file proper reports just because of the amount of ridicule that they'll face.
And that even showed up in your article where, one of the guys was saying, yeah, they were joking me when I was reporting this story or talking about the story.
Well, sure. One of the, the case I just mentioned from 2007, I was able to get the report on that through what we in Canada call access to information requests. That's your FOIA legislation in the U.S. And I was able to, find the name of the person who filed that report. And they said they were just teased and ridiculed mercilessly. And that actually the amount of teasing that they faced for filing this report factored into their decision to retiring from the military.
Here's another one. Another just from DART, November 27, 2002. An observation on NORAD radar of a large tubular object between 37 and 47,000 feet in the near Chicago, which was moving towards the Thunder Bay area, unquote. Let's say this is in northwestern Ontario. The account seems reminiscent of a widely reported February 21st, 2021 event in New Mexico, where an American Airlines flight called an air traffic controller after seeing a long cylindrical object moving really fast over the top of the United States, unquote. So the shapes and the things that these guys are basically seeing are not conforming to the typical avionics. I mean, have some of these reports, what's the closest up report that the people have seen? Have they seen things beyond just the light in the sky? Has it been something where it was, I mean, look, he's reporting a tubular object, right? So that's, I guess, answers my question in one sense. But have there been other reports of these things in this kind of close-up capacity?
Involving the Canadian military, there's rumors of certain cases. I haven't been able to conclusively prove any more close-up encounters involving the military. But that being said, prior to publishing this story on military encounters, I wrote a story about a month ago for Vice that detailed encounters between commercial pilots and UFOs. So I found the Canadian government has an aviation incident database that contains reports, on everything from bird strikes to mechanical failures. And within there are reports from pilots on UFOs. So for example, there was one there from the morning of May 30th, 2016, where an Air Canada flight from Montreal to Toronto reported it had, quote, crossed an unidentified flying object, round in shape, flying at an approximate speed of 300 knots, which is more than 550 kilometers an hour. Don't ask me to convert that to miles per hour.
No, you're fine.
This example here shows that, it's not just confined to military installations and military personnel that professional aviators operating in Canadian airspace are seeing, round objects, round unidentified objects that sort of conform to the sort of stereotypical UFO. But that being said, the reports contain all kinds of things: tubular objects, square objects, lights of different shapes, lights of different colors. There's no one type of sighting, but for me, I find that very compelling. If you have military personnel and professional aviators seeing this kind of stuff and not being able to identify it, it definitely warrants a closer look. These are the types of people who should know what to look for in this guy.
I'm curious, have there been any, I guess I want to say strikes, but I don't even know if that would be something they would put in the records. I mean, but I'll ask the question anyway. Have you been able to find like any where, not just a near miss, but an actual hit? Because some of the people are complaining, like some of the fighter pilots and some of the people who are in the military personnel are basically saying these things are crossing our flight paths. It's a danger.
Sure. The closest case, I haven't. There's one case that involves a plane in Canada hitting an unidentified object. It was probably a drone. There was a very near miss case from 2016 in Canada where a flight from Ottawa, our capital, to Toronto, where I live, was coming over Lake Ontario to land at an airport that's just off Lake Ontario. And as it was approaching the airport, it saw a tubular donut-like object directly in its flight path hovering there. So this was a commercial passenger plane, and it took a nosedive to avoid hitting this thing. The two flight attendants who were in the midst of securing the cabin for arrival, they weren't wearing their seatbelts, and they got thrown into the cabin structure as the plane took the evasive maneuver, and they were briefly hospitalized.
One of the other weird aspects of this, right? I'll just read it again from the article. Phenomenal article. Again, this is Vice. There is something here. So it says Matthew Hayes is a researcher and filmmaker whose 2019 doctoral dissertation focused on Canada's Cold War UFO records. I mean, because, we used to have like Foo Fighters, where Germans thought they were ours. We thought they were theirs. Nobody knew what these things were, these balls. So he makes the point. He says, quote, when I look back at old UFO records and compare them with those that have been coming out in media reports recently, I see way more continuity than any rupture or change, he told Vice World News. People are reporting the same thing from year to year and decade to decade, he said. That lends credence to the idea that there is something here. Like, meaning basically it's like nobody's seeing these kind of radical departures. The people who were 50 years ago are basically reporting similar things as to now. And if you can take, let's say, 90% and explain, let's say 99% and explain, some of that stuff is weird and bizarre. What do you make of that? And I know that's somewhat of an expensive question, but I mean, what do you think that bespeaks of, if you're thinking like logically of, okay, there's something, we don't quite know what it is, but people are saying basically the same thing or similar things going back for the last 50 years?
Yeah, well, it says to me that, as Dr. Hayes said, there is something here. And that I think, when you have, 50, 60, 70 years of sightings that, largely remain unchanged, that type of continuity really suggests that perhaps prosaic explanations aren't going to work here. You know,
Yeah,
today
I don't
we
like the
talk
lazy
about weather
explanation.
balloons, drones,
Oh,
but
parallax.
somebody in the yeah, like
that stuff.
It's just.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, I was just going to repeat myself, but those prosaic explanations, the weather balloons, the drones, things like that, those types of explanations don't really hold when you're talking about people in the early 1950s and, like you said, in the 40s during World War II, seeing these kinds of things.
I'm curious, what did your sources say they think they were? Meaning, when your sources were encountering this stuff, either the light, either being in their aircraft, seeing these tubes or whatever else, what did they perceive in that situation? Meaning, how did they think of it? Did they think of, okay, that just looks like some kind of craft, that looks like some kind of drone, that looks like some kind of avionics, that looks like some kind of interdimensional fish? Like, what was the impression that they had of what they were perceiving? I'm just curious.
Frankly, most of the sources and the witnesses I've spoken to directly, they're not really trying to guess. Their thought process was more about, what am I not looking at? Yeah. Okay, this is not a conventional aircraft. This is not swamp gas. This is not. None of them. I think a lot of them perhaps think that some of the things they've seen are otherworldly, just because of some of the methods of propulsion, things zipping around at very fast speeds, no visible means of propulsion, et cetera, like that. People remain, the sources I've spoken to, they all remain open-minded, but most of them are also convinced that what they saw were not conventional aircraft.
One of the craft where the gentleman said it wasn't the Russians, and he goes into, when he has to report it, because, it's like, all right, we have to write a report on this thing that we saw that we can't identify that was moving at these fantastic speeds. And he says, quote, there appeared to be other reports in there, so I assume that mine was not the first one that had crossed his desk, unquote. McManus, who spent most of his career in the infantry, said, quote, what I reported did not surprise him at all, unquote. Basically, like, this stuff was so common that they weren't shocked by it. By the same token, they didn't also seem to be concerned by it from the standpoint of a defensive posture. Now, that is so utterly bizarre. If you think about it, you have defense people who have a frame of reference, a workable frame of reference, a workable point of view of defense, protection, attack, etc. It's this kind of pragmatic worldview of something is invading our military installations, we need to blow it out the sky. That can't be allowed. It's not this compromised position thing. That's not their jobs. And yet, whether it's in Canada over the last 70 years, or whether it's in the United States, what it seems to have been taking place was that sensitive military installations were basically being buzzed or being, I don't know what you want to call it, surveilled, invaded, and taking place over the course of a long period of time. And the military personnel, who you would think would have somewhat of a more, I guess, heightened reaction to this, was remarkably muted. Did they explain that at all? Like, because the moment that you say somebody was in my house, shouldn't that concern you if you didn't know who the person was? And some of the stuff that the people are reporting are fantastic. Like, how did Canada square that with national security stuff? Or did they even get into that in your conversations with them?
Well, it's somewhat bizarre. There is a paradox there, as you suggested. It's weird. Canada, I have found documents from 1950 and 1953 from the Canadian military that show that they were receiving so many reports of this nature that they decided to standardize UFO reporting procedures just so like they could get a better handle on all these reports they were getting. When that guy, retired Lieutenant Colonel Pat McManus, he said, I wasn't able to find his report, but I actually was able to find several other reports from the same base. And pretty much like most Canadian bases have some of these reports. It's hard to reconcile the fact that, odd lights are hovering over military installations, and yet there doesn't seem to be a strong reaction from our military.
Yeah.
I wonder, whether or not they're behind the scenes, that they have looked into this matter. For example, that one of the cases I mentioned from 2007, my source told me that it was forwarded to NORAD in Colorado for analysis. So yes, there's some analysis here, but
not overtly.
It's hard to figure this one out. Like, these things are hovering over bases. It clearly seems like that's a national security concern, but at least the public response from the military is very muted, which it doesn't go with like how big of a concern this is. If somebody, for example, is shining lights into my house at night, I'd be pretty worried about that.
Yeah, especially if you can't identify it. I mean, these guys have all sorts of technology to ensure that they can identify stuff like that. Telescopes, infrared, FLIR camera, the works. And in many of these cases, they're like, we don't know. It doesn't conform. I'm also curious about whether or not any of the people had visitations from higher ups to basically say, keep quiet.
No, as far as I know, no. I mean, I think the culture within the military itself really mutes conversation to this effect. Most of the guys I spoke to, the former military personnel, they all told me that these were not stories that they shared openly.
Yeah.
These weren't, anecdotes that they would tell over dinner or drinks in the officers' quarters. They mostly kept these things to themselves. And the reason they did so was because of the intense ridicule. When you're operating in the military, for example, you don't want to be labeled the UFO nut. In the military, one is not supposed to express their individuality to that extent. You get noticed and you'll get in trouble. Maybe not formally, but in terms of and culturally and socially, for sure.
From your study of everything that has been taking place, be it Canada, the U.S., and especially in the U.S., with the report, because the U.S. is taking this kind of weird leadership role and saying, all right, we're going to have a report about this. Like very loud, very brash, and boisterous, and talking about, all right, we're going to talk about this. We're gonna come onto some, figuring out what this is. And mind you, the report is not going to do that. And the catch, it's very weird. Like the very act of the report, not saying it's aliens, but not saying that it's not aliens, basically gives Congress a situation of dramatic unsatisfaction. I mean, after all, the report basically says, hey, we are going to give you exactly what we gave you before, with one caveat: it's not our military. That's the wild part, because the one key bit of information that they're dropping is it's not us. That's also the one bit of information where you can basically throw away because nobody believes that these guys are going to out their own special programs. But what do you think is going on here? I mean, I've heard Stephen Bassett thinks it's being choreographed. It does look on some level like these guys are trying to do this in a particular way or do something on this front, because otherwise they would have just said the videos weren't ours when they had the opportunity to do it. They could have killed the story years ago. They didn't do that. There was this kind of weird push and pull. So what do you think, one, is going on here? And I know this is conjecture, right? All of us are in the dark in a radical sense. But on top of that, what do you think happens as this moves forward over the course of time? And I think we just lost him. Okay, he'll be back. He'll just be back. Oh, are you back?
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Excellent.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Did you hear my last question, by the way?
You guys hear me? Did I lose you?
Oh, yeah, you just a split second. Just for a split second. Did you hear the last question that I gave you, basically about the expectations going forward, for the report, but also, honestly, just going forward as the world is looking at this issue continuously in the dark? Like the fact that the report is not exposing anything, with one exception, that the United States wants everybody to believe, and if you're very clear about, it's not us. Like, so what does that mean going forward? Okay. Can you hear me, Daniel?
Hey, can you hear me? Are we good?
Yeah, I think we're good. Did you hear the last question?
So
go for it.
Yeah, you were asking about this this report. It's the report wasn't mandated by the Pentagon itself. The actual it seems that the request for the report was directly came from Marco Rubio, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who's on the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Right.
In terms of, I understand that within the UFO community, there's a lot of frustration, especially some of the information that's already leaked, like in the New York Times, where they said, well, we can tell you we're not sure it's aliens. We don't know if it's aliens. It might not be aliens. It could be alien. For me, I think what's interesting more than anything here is that we're going to see an official acknowledgement from defense and intelligence officials that there is a mystery.
Yeah, there's
and
a there
I think
there.
that's significant of itself. I think this sort of phenomenon has been happening long enough and unexplained that if anyone posits to have a full understanding and explanation for this, they're probably pulling your leg.
Yeah.
Or so I think just at the very minimum, official acknowledgement that there is some degree of mystery here is going to be significant. You know, if you have the Pentagon saying that we don't know what this is, it creates an environment where it suddenly becomes okay to study this without fear of ridicule or being dismissed or eye rolling. So it legitimizes, I think, at the very least, even a report that doesn't say very much, at least legitimizes this as a field of study.
Yeah, and I think it's a magnificent departure. Like, it's not, hey, here's an alien, kick the tires of the craft. It's not that. It's basically not Project Blue Book either, where Project Blue Book basically say, oh, there's nothing to see. It's just swamp gas. It's swamp gas and light hitting the raindrops in a particular way that just, radically screwed up the person's visual capacity. No, they're not doing that. They're doing almost the opposite of that. There's a there there. And it's like, okay, well, what is that there there? We don't know what that there there is. And then they will even say there's a lot of classified stuff that you guys don't have access to that is far more barn burner. And it's like, okay, so we can't see it, but you can tell me about it. Yes. Like, that's so different. Like, it's almost like they've taken steps where it is difficult to walk back, be it Rubio, be it Ratcliffe. Many of these guys who've been out there talking, even Obama on some level, legitimizes the issue, meaning he knew the information while he was president. He just didn't say anything about it. Like, so I don't know what this report is going to be, but I do know, I agree with you. The fact that it legitimizes this thing is, okay, this is a mystery. We don't know what this is. And it starts right there. Just the fact that it stands there means Congress has to do something. Like, what is Congress going to do? Just say, okay, it's a mystery. Something is invading our airspace. Keep it moving. How can they say that? And so it's like, I'm very curious. I'm just kind of curious on what people think and their take on kind of the outcome of this stuff. As this moves forward and the public kind of internalizes this, and Congress potentially has hearings. I mean, because Congress has to do something. Either they need to have another report, they either need to have another commission, they need to expand the funding of it. They have to do something. I mean, even going with the assumption that it's just us, you still need to have that kind of funding for that stuff. What happens as that takes place? Do you think the public is engaged? I mean, do you think the public is, at the edge of their seat? And what do you think happens as the public starts to internalize, oh, wait, there is a there mystery here?
Well, I think we're in the midst of that. I mean, after, what was it, in the middle of May, 60 Minutes ran a segment on the issue. And following the CBS 60 Minutes segment, everyone followed suit. Every major media outlet across North America ran serious, level-headed stories on the topic, which shows to me, I caution against using terms like this, but it almost seems like we're in the beginning of some sort of paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Whereby, a topic that used to just be attenuated by, giggling and laughing suddenly is being taken seriously by major media outlets across North America. It suggests to me that, perceptions are changing. Has that filtered down to the public? Has the public at large been made aware of this and is intrigued? I don't know. I think there's a growing appetite for information on this. Just listen, I've written hundreds of stories in my journalism career. I've written 3 stories on UFOs, and the reaction was extraordinary. Like the number of people reaching out, et cetera. So it just shows to me that there's a real appetite for sort of level-headed reporting on the subject that takes it seriously, as any sort of journalistic investigation. And I think people are done. The public is done with this sort of fluffy type of UFO stories that we were bombarded with in the 80s, 90s, things like that. They want real data. They don't want the Hollywood silliness. People want data. But is the world going to accept that some sort of possible explanation for this? I don't know. I think people are opening their eyes to the fact that there's a very real mystery happening on our planet right now, and that's worthy of a closer look.
I think the thing that concerns me is sometimes, because it's so in the black, that we're stuck with whatever we're told on the issue, and that trying to independently verify some of this stuff, especially the military stuff, it's almost difficult to kind of pull off unless they're putting that stuff in records in ways that people can kind of get their hands on it, or less stuff is leaked. And so when I see it here, I often wonder, will people reach higher than their typical natures for the subject? And my gut instinct says no, but a lot of people tell me I'm wrong. Now, I am one of those people who, like I said, used to be the hippie, but right, it's a space brother. And then I started doing news like a decade, like what, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And yeah, I don't believe that anymore. When I look at what may take place from the standpoint of like people trying to accommodate this information, I am greatly concerned about reporting and how that reporting may have impact on the societal point of view going forward. And I put a great gravity on the issue, which is the reason why, part of the reason that I do the subject here as a platform and try to talk about it, because I try to use it in a sane way. I try to stick with it from a standpoint of, all right, this is what I know, this is what I believe, this is what's being reported, and I try to explain it to people in these kind of long form terms where they can have some kind of recollection as they come to the issue, and they're not just radically in the dark, and they're being told by Nick Pope that aliens have committed an act of war on America. Like, that's astonishingly what's the word I'm looking for? Wrong. I mean, because if you think about it, think about a person who first encounters the issue, and their first instinct on the issue, meaning their first exposure to it, is the one that they get stuck with for God knows how long. And it is very difficult to wedge a point of view out of somebody once that point of view has been internalized. And so for the first, cosmic human, cosmic baby, space baby in 2001, and that baby is exposed to Nick Pope, Ministry of Defense, screaming about aliens potentially attacking America. Yeah, I think that's dramatically problematic in regard to the things that are putting people's heads. And so it's like going out in the next 5 years, 10 years, as this mystery kind of, and they're investigating this mystery and everything else. It's like, what I don't want is the public to get put in a fear perspective of the world. And with this being stuck in the defense capacities, that is one of my greatest concerns. That is one of my greatest concerns. Does that bother you? Like when we had a guest that called earlier today that kind of made the same point. Like, does that tenor, that tilt of the public, because the public, I'll tell you this, when we were watching the elections this year around, we were covering the elections, depending upon what the media covered, how the media covered the person would go up or down in the polls. So Elizabeth Warren would get her light in the sun. They would give her favorable coverage. She would float for a bit. The coverage would turn bad, and she would fall down. Basically, the media itself, in some respects, depending upon the story, influences the opinions of the people who are viewing it. And if media is taking this kind of caustic perspective, or this perspective of, hey, maybe there's something that's attacking us, and hey, they're shutting off a nukes, and hey, maybe this is taking place. I don't know how the public accommodates that information, and whether or not it's going to accommodate it in a way that's, I don't know, less chaotic, if that makes sense. What is your take on that? I mean, do you agree with that, or just disagree with that in general?
I see that as a fundamental issue with the whole, so-called UFO topic. I understand that, in the United States, the reason that this has become elevated into a political issue is because, former people from the Pentagon, Defense Department, et cetera, have been advocating regarding this issue for years, and they advocate on what they call the threat narrative. That yes, unidentified objects are interfering with, our nuclear capabilities. Unidentified objects are, the so-called act of war, I think, had to do with,
it was
a radar
Jeremy Corbell's video
being jammed.
Yeah.
And they're using that threat narrative. Activists within that community have used that threat narrative to raise awareness amongst senators and people in Congress, and it's worked. The reason Marco Rubio has taken this on as one of his causes is because he was provided that information. Now, in my reporting, I don't really subscribe to that threat narrative that's used to get attention. I think we're dealing with something that's fundamentally mysterious, something that I approach with a sense of awe and wonder, not with fear, and I think that's a problem. But and another problem too, to go back to Rubio, for example, he suggested that he's seen material footage that hasn't been made available to the public, and he suggested that witnessing that kind of stuff is what sort of opened his eyes to this. And there's others who have said they've seen other things that aren't public, which fundamentally bothers me. I mean, we're dealing with a situation where for 7 decades now,
right?
we're adult human beings, and we're being treated by our governments like children who can't handle, truthful information. When these people are technically our employees, they have their jobs because of our tax dollars and our votes. They're our employees, and I think if there's unclassified material like this that doesn't, expose any national security weaknesses, whatever. If there's unclassified material of this nature that the public hasn't seen, I think we have every right to see it and make judgments for ourselves. It's just been all these years, we're just being coddled. And, the governments of the world clearly have more information on this topic. My reporting shows that.
Yeah.
Most of the cases I've found have been through FOIA requests. So I think the conversation's changing. People's eyes are opening. I think it's time to, the public is treated like adults and can see some more of this material and come to our own conclusions.
See, I think the thing is, though, that from their perspective, the very act of the information itself is subversive. Meaning, like, what happens when the information itself becomes something that is undermining to the government itself? That may be their take, if that makes sense. I'm not saying it's a right take. I'm just saying they may be looking at it through that security lens of, this is an inflection point that we can't control. And because we can't control it, we can't foresee it. That's not where we're going. It could be that. Like, it could be that straight. Because think about it for the moment. If one of them came out, let's say this report came out and said, they're aliens. Here's a ship. Thanks. I'm going to get a coffee. What happens on day 2? All hell breaks loose.
Madness.
Yeah, it's chaos. It's utter chaos. And if you think, and you can't walk that back. You can't say, oh, this is a rubber alien, and then bodily fluids fall out. Oh, that's not real. You can't do that. And so it's like you're stuck with this kind of thing of like, all right, how do you dispense information in a way that doesn't just radically destabilize us? What does science do for the moment? Scientists have gotten it wrong. And not just have gotten it wrong, they have to come out and they're going to say, okay, well, this is how this works. And all of these new equations, all of these new ideas for technology, all of this stuff is going to all of a sudden populate your society in rapid succession. That stuff is going to be used for military application first and foremost, because we have to defend ourselves from whatever it is. Like, it's chaos. And so it becomes this like, all right, so what if from their perspective, the information in and of itself is the national security threat? How do you manage that? I think that's, on some level, if I take the better angels of this, meaning if I say, let's not take the radical perspective. Let's take the perspective of, all right, I just want to be a good American, good human being, and deal with this information that is mind-blowing to me. How do you do it? Am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong. I'm totally open to a different point of view on it. And like I said, it's the better angels argument. That's true. But like you say, if it's not a national security thing, they should release it. But what if, from their perspective, the very information is a national security catastrophe of some level?
Yeah, and it is potentially. And not only that, we're, for example, the U.S. government is supposed to have the most powerful military in the world. And, if you have an official admission from the, what's supposed to be the most powerful country in the world, that their military assets are being outmaneuvered and outperformed regularly, that creates a fundamental issue in terms of, having confidence in the security apparatus. So there are huge societal military implications to, what the UFO community calls disclosure.
Yeah.
My perspective is kind of radical on this. Others will say that there's good reasons for official secrets. I'm of the perspective that, even if some degree of societal chaos was going to be an outcome from revealing this type of information, I'd rather have, a fuller picture, and I'd rather have more data and, more truth.
Yeah.
I think there's societal implications to any revelations, no matter how opaque or clear regarding this issue. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to hear more. I'd like to. I can handle it.
I keep saying that too. I'm like, I just want somebody to whisper in my ear. I think just a spook, just be like, hey, this is what's really going on. Be like, thank you. You can't tell anybody. That's fine. I just want to know. Daniel, thank you, man. I really appreciate this. I love having these type of conversations because, like you say, you are looking at it. It's a mystery. That's it. No more, no less. And there have been investigations, and what have the investigations been finding? It's that stuff. It's a journalistic inquiry into it without necessarily jumping to one conclusion or the other. It's just kind of like, here's the data, here's the information, this is what they were doing. There you are. And I love that. So I really do appreciate that. I had Mick West on earlier in the week. So somebody who basically was entirely against all of it. Everything is swamp gas. Everything is optical illusions. Everybody is incompetent. All the machines are glitchy. Like, it's that type of thing. So no, I like having this conversation where it's like, yeah, I don't know what it is. It's a mystery, and this is what's going on in regards to what we know so far. So Daniel Otis, thank you, man. Daniel Otis is a camera-wielding journalist who covers travel, trials, and almost everything in between. You can find his news and feature stories at outlets like the Toronto Star, Vice, CTV News, The Globe, The Mail, Sunset, Al Jazeera, Roads and Kingdoms, The Diplomat, Slate, Southeast Asia Globe, Next City, and The Monthly. Fault Lines, Thomas Stranahan, back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. This is the wrap, at least for the next 6 minutes. It's going to be the wrap. Shane typically does the wrap. I don't typically do this. He typically leads the segment. I get the monologue. He gets the closing. But we're going to do that. And we are also accepting calls. We have Tarif from New Orleans. Tarif, what's going on, my man?
Thanks for taking my call. Good morning to y'all. I got 4 comments. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Dengenzer in West Papua New Guinea. Erdogan, my first comment is Erdogan criticized NATO for criticizing Russia and Belarus. China developed a inhalation vaccine from Sinopharm. My third comment, China also is building a Mark 30 wind tunnel in Beijing.
I saw that.
Yeah.
The mechanics and the physics of that were astonishing. Like, basically, they were building these hypersonic wind tunnels to test, I would imagine, high performance aircraft, like dramatically high performance aircraft. But Tariq, please continue.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, that Mark 30, you need one more Mark 31, then you can leave Earth gravity. All right. Okay. And also, the Shiptons, Julian Assange's father and brother, is making a tour throughout the U.S., gathering support for the son so they can, Joe Biden can, pardon him, so they can drop the charges. I think it's best, in my opinion, if y'all can maybe get the father on, the brother on, or both of them on.
I would love to get any of them on. Yeah, I would love to get any of them on. And Austin, make a mental note. If he's going to be traveling, let's try to reach out to him. Austin has been magical with his capability of reaching out to people. And Tariq, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Did you have any more comments?
No, that's it. Just please, just support freedom of the press,
It is very bizarre that we have a political prisoner dying in public. Almost like they tied him to a post. That's basically what it feels like, right? I mean, I get he was in a room. I get he was in an embassy. But for all intents and purposes, the world watched. And the world watched a journalist get railroaded. And for 7 years, stuck in a room, stuck in a building or something like that? Because if he walks out the room, the diplomatic community basically would be null and void, and he would get dragged to some level of jail for a bail jump. It wasn't even a bail jump because he was trying to get special. He was trying to get embassy coverage, and so it's very strange, right, for something like that to take place over the course of several years, and we just watch, and he just deteriorates, and we just watch, and he deteriorates, and yet we would say, hey, you guys have some issues with press freedom in your country, and it's like, you guys have a journalist in prison, and the only reason you put him in prison was because you didn't like what he was publishing. And Tarif, I don't know if you're still on the phone, but what does that make you think of regular journalists? Like if Julian Assange, what he was doing, Tarif's gone. If Julian Assange, what he was doing was basically publishing information from the lion's mouth of sorts, and that information had gotten to the point where the governments of the world were so angry at him, they did put him in a cage. When you ask the question, well, what about the New York Times? What about Washington Post? And I suspect that the difference between those things is sources say, anonymous sources say, et cetera, whereas Julian Assange, here's the documents for yourself. No filter. So yeah, Tarif, yeah, my heart goes out to him, man. It really is sad for that condition to keep taking place. Now we've had a pretty decent show today, despite the fact that Shane wasn't here. The guests from Vice on that story, as I was reading through his repertoire, I mean, he's Toronto Star, Vice, CTV News, The Globe and Mail, Sunset, Al Jazeera, Roads and Kingdoms, The Diplomat, Slate, Southeast Asia, Globe, Next City, and Monthly. He writes about pretty much everything. Now that is uber interesting. He did the research, and that's the part, right? It's not just debunking. Yeah, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. I don't know if Shane is going to be back tomorrow. He wasn't feeling all that well today, but we were able to get to all of our guests. Also, Cahill, we need to get more physicists and scientists on. She was a great guest. And when you get to people who basically can explain our world, that is that much more phenomenal. So let's do this. I'm going to wrap. I'm going to give a shout out to our engineers, Andre, producer, Austin and Cordell, and to our Tummy Ache co-host, Shane Stranahan. We will see you tomorrow. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be safe.